like to call the November 29th, 2021 Governing Board meeting to order. Governing Board members President Paul Bixler, Brian Parks, and Michael Todd, and myself, Mark Aguirre, being held here at Jerry Rovey District Facility. Brian, if you could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone back from Thanksgiving. I hope that you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving with your families. It is recommended the Governing Board approve the regular agenda form consistent with Board Policy BEDB and temporarily suspend Governing Board policy with which this agenda may be inconsistent.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the regular agenda form consistent with Board Policy BEDB and temporarily suspend Governing Board policy with which this agenda may be inconsistent.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously. Administrative reports, construction procurement methods, Mrs. Basinger.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the Governing Board. The district is expecting to need to procure construction services for additional classroom space at Las Brisas Academy, as well as a new transportation facility. Additionally, the district is experiencing continued growth, which will also require construction of new school facilities. As you're aware, there are strict guidelines for school procurement in general. Embedded in those guidelines are multiple options for the procurement of construction. Mr. Bill Munch, Procurement Compliance and Training Officer with Valley Schools, is here this evening to present information on the pros and cons for the construction project delivery options and methods. And with the potential for multiple construction projects in the foreseeable future, we are requesting that the Governing Board provide administration direction on the preferred option or options for construction projects, not just necessarily for the additional classrooms and the transportation, but for upcoming new school construction as that need arises. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Bill Munch, and he has some very good information for you.
Thank you. I don't get called Mr. very often. Board President, board members, thank you for having me back here. This is a presentation that I've actually done for the Arizona Association of School Business Officials for 50-minute class for a day. I've also done it through Valley Schools. We put together construction procurement workshops. This is just a brief portion of it. What I'm going to go over tonight is just the various methods of construction procurement, the pros and cons, and just give you a feel for what options we have. Many of these options, well, the alternative project delivery methods that I'm going to talk about, they were actually created in 2000. So they've been around for more than 20 years. So it's not like this is new procurement. This is something that has been around for 20 years that many districts have been very successful using. So let's just go ahead and go through the presentation. First thing we're going to talk about is design, bid, build. That's the traditional method. It's the invitation for bid. We have bid due dates and times and advertising. There can be a pre-bid meeting, but there's no interviews. We don't interview the firms. We just take the low bid as they submit. It's awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. It's absolutely essential that we have rock solid specs. When we don't have good specs on the project, that leads to change orders. So you really want to be careful when you're using this method that we have good solid specs. If there's a lot of unforeseen conditions, that would lead to some of the other alternative project delivery methods that I'm going to talk to you about tonight. But anyway, let's get back to design, bid, build. Again, this is the way it was done until 2000. This was the only way you could procure construction from the time the school district procurement code came together in the early 80s. This is the only way you could procure construction. You had to put together a spec and have the vendors respond to it. The pros are, it's well known and understood. It's what we've been doing since day one. It emphasizes head-on competition based on price. It's easy to award and to justify that award. The low bidder that meets the requirements of the bid gets the contract. How much easier can it be than that? The cons are tight bid specs can be difficult to write and evaluate, even for the architects, for them to do that on behalf of the district. It can be very difficult. The low bidder tends to try to make money by knowing there's change orders coming up. I've been in situations where vendors see issues on the pre-bid and they don't even mention them. Hey, you didn't consider this, because they know they can carry that over and possibly change it, change their price through a bid order. Low bid, get in there. Hopefully we can make it up with the change orders. I've heard that for the 30 years I've been doing construction procurement. Hey, we'll take the low bid and we'll just make it up on the change orders. And that historically is what happens on a lot of these low bid projects. It can be prone to protest because the process is so rigid. I mentioned in 2000 the new alternative project delivery methods came about that I'm going to talk about. There have been very few protests on that. When we do hard bid, it tends to lead to many more protests. The emphasis is on cost over quality and value. We're going to talk a little bit about the subcontractors that provide pricing. It is in the contractor's best interest to go with those subcontractors that provide the lowest cost. Well, the lowest cost isn't always the best value, okay? Any questions on the design bid build method before I move on to design build?
Yes, you said that the specs are hard to write, and even architects have difficulty doing that for their clients. Then who writes the specs?
No, the architect would still write the specs, but there are a lot of unforeseen conditions that can come up, and that can make it difficult to write the specs. That was my point. Does that help? Okay, thank you so much for your question. Any other questions?
So I just wanted to touch on, you made a statement, you said that cheapest always doesn't mean the highest quality, but yet that's what the FSB uses when they award all their contracts, sir.
For the building renewal grant, you are correct. They require districts to use the low bid traditional method that I just talked about. However, they have allowed some districts to use job order contracting that I'm going to talk about later. But 98% of the projects, you are correct, they do low bid. And a lot of the things I pointed out on this slide, I could bring you a gaggle of procurement people from school districts that would say, yep, we found this to be true in our SFB project. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do design bid build. I'm just saying there's other procurement methods that we should look at every time we're looking at a project. What's the best method to choose? Because there's not one best method for every single procurement. One of the things I tell my class when I'm teaching this is every procurement stands on its own. You got to look at all the facets of the procurement and say, does this make sense? If I have a simple project and it's easily spec'd and we're confident that everything's a good go, then design bid build is definitely the way to go. I don't want you to walk away from my presentation on this slide thinking that I'm saying you shouldn't do design bid build ever. You should just have that as a choice. Okay. When we have clearly defined specifications.
Thank you.
Which isn't always the case.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for your question. All right, design build. Don't confuse it with design bid build. The first alternative project delivery method is design build, or DB. It's an RFQ. The committee selects the contractor by quality. The selected contractor provides both the design and the construction services. The award of the construction contract only if the GC's bid fits within the district's budget. So even though we're selecting the most highly qualified vendor, we're still looking at a contractor that can still meet within the budget. We're not giving them a blank check, hey, charge whatever you want to the district. We're going to negotiate that contract. The pros are, it is qualification-based selection. There's a reduction in finger pointing because the contractor and the architect are working within the same firm. It's a single point of contract for the project delivery, that contractor. The potential is for continuous value engineering and feedback. The idea is, what's the best solution to this project? I've seen design bid work really well on fire alarms, for example. Have them design it, put it together, tell us how they're going to do it, and what it's going to cost. So design build can be a great method for that. Some of the cons are the owner still has to have a clear and detailed scope of work. There's a potential for a decreased accountability, and there is a potential that a less qualified owner may not have the expertise to actually evaluate the contractor. You still got to have the people in place that can actually run this type of contract. Any questions on design build? Okay. Let's move on to construction manager at risk. Many districts have adopted this method as their standard. Somebody asked me today, actually, hey, if you're going to build a new school, what method would you use? Well, even the SFB recognizes. Remember I mentioned building renewal grants, all hard bid? When they build a new school, they recommend the district use the construction manager at risk type of project delivery. It introduces quality up front, but behaves much like a typical design bid build project after award of the GMP. The GMP is the guaranteed maximum price that you receive for that project. Once we get that project, we're still managing that project just like we would a hard bid. So I want you to keep that in mind. But again, we've negotiated that. It reduces the vulnerability for change orders because they are giving us a guaranteed maximum price, which includes all the facets. The only changes to the price would be owner-initiated change orders. Hey, we want this instead of that, or we want this added. That could change the price. Other than that, they've got to build it for the price that they give you, that you've negotiated. Okay. There's a RFQ. The committee reviews, analyzes, and selects a pre-construction by the general contractor based on quality and qualifications. The committee composition, we're going to talk about that later on. The award of the construction contract is only if the GC's guaranteed maximum price fits within the district budget. So basically, when we're awarding this contract, we come up with the most highly qualified vendor. We say, this is the most highly qualified vendor. We need them to design the project. So we give them a contract for what they call pre-construction services. We negotiate that contract. Then when the contract is at least, when the specs are at least 50% completed, now we can negotiate for that GMP that I just talked about, that guaranteed maximum price. That allows us to do that. If we are unable to come to a guaranteed maximum price, but they've already completed the design, the district actually owns the design at that point, and then the district determines what do we want to do. It's very rare that we negotiate a contract where we're not able to come to a guaranteed maximum price with the same contractor that designed the project. But if it does happen, the district's feet are not held to the fire. Hey, they designed the project, we have to award them based on whatever guaranteed maximum price they come up with, or terms and conditions of that contract. Because we may not be able to come to a contract because we can't agree on terms and conditions. Very rare that that happens. 99.9% of the time we negotiate with the vendor that designed the project, we're able to come to a GMP. We meet in the middle someplace and we're able to agree. Any questions on CM at risk so far at this point? All right, I said we would talk about committees. 3 weeks ago, we talked about the committee for architects. These requirements are not there. The only requirements for the architect on a selection of an architect is we must have one person from the district on the committee. With an alternative project delivery selection committee, which again includes CM at risk, design build, and job order contracting that we're going to talk about, the members have to be competent to serve. This is right in the procurement rules. Must contain at least one school district rep. But the other requirements are we cannot exceed 7 members. Of those 7, up to 7 members, we have to make sure we have a senior management person of a licensed contractor. We're not going to get a licensed senior management position because those contractors are not licensed. Their company is licensed. And the reason I bring that up is with the architect, we have to make sure we get an architect who is registered. Not someone who works for an architecture firm. They have to work as an architect with that firm and be licensed as an architect. We already had a district on the east side that messed up. They had an architect firm representative be on the committee, but they weren't a licensed architect. That's a violation of the procurement rules. So what I want you to remember is for the contractor, it's got to be the contractor that's licensed. Your architect representative has to be the person that has the license. Very important that we distinguish between those two. Who's responsible for checking and verifying those qualifications? The district should be checking and verifying those qualifications. How often do you do it? You do it currently. You do it while you're in that procurement. You verify that they are still registered. Because just because an architect's registered today doesn't mean he was registered 6 months ago or vice versa. The members may not have conflicts of interest with the project. They can't be involved in any facets of the project. The member has to be separated from that. The multiple contracts for JOC, they have to use the same committee for every JOC contract. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Okay. What are the pros and cons of construction manager at risk? It's a qualification-based selection. It encourages teamwork amongst the owner, the architect, and the general contractor. Pre-construction services by the general contractor and subcontractors can reduce or eliminate change orders. The cost contained by the overall contract and ongoing engineering helps contain cost and maximize that buildability. We're working with the contractor to come up with a solution for this construction project. The timeline can definitely be reduced because design and pre-construction can overlap each other. Remember I mentioned earlier, we can negotiate a contract with only a 50% construction design. That's what the rules allow for. The cons, yeah, it can be more expensive than a traditional procurement method, but remember when you're comparing those, what change orders would we have gotten had we done it as a traditional procurement rather than an alternative? The owner has to stay engaged. I can say that with all of these procurement methods. The owner still has to be engaged with the process. You can't just hand it over to the architect or the contractor or that contractor that's acting as your architect. You still have to administer that contract. Pre-construction services, I mentioned it earlier. You do have to pay for this. It could be a lump sum or a percentage. The general contractor and the subs are involved with the design and approach. You get a subcontractor list from that contractor. It's all open book information. There's continuous value engineering that goes on, developing the alternatives, establishing the prior approvals. And then, as we said, once we've got at least 50% of that construction design done, we're going to develop a guaranteed maximum price, which is going to include the schedule of values, the allowances, the fees, and the general conditions. Any questions on CM at risk? Okay, let's move on quickly to job order contracting. Pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there any cost savings that are split between GCs, architectural, and the owner?
You know, it's interesting that you asked that. We have a guaranteed maximum price. If they can bring it in for less than that price, there could be money returned to the district. Absolutely, that happens.
What about to the GCs?
Not necessarily to the GCs. The way it works, it would go back to the district because the GCs are working with the architect, so it doesn't really work that way. It would go back to the district. The savings would be at the district level.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Yes, you said that a committee's involved with the procurement aspect of it. Does the fact that the committee's directly involved create any time issues? Does it slow it up?
You know, it actually speeds up the process because, again, on a construction manager at risk, you're able to do the design and you've already done that. You still have to evaluate. You're going to be going through an evaluation. So yes, the evaluation process may be longer, but the overall process is going to be shorter because we can do things concurrently that you're not able to do in a bid situation.
So what you might lose in the pre-stuff might be caught up in the actual construction. Also, it talks about no more than 7. I'm assuming that the expectation is those committees are odd in number, so you can always come to a decision?
That's what I would recommend. There's nothing in the rules that requires that, but that is definitely a best practice that many districts have adopted.
And is there any advantage to doing less than 7?
There's no advantage, there's no disadvantage. How much representation do you want on that committee? But you can't go beyond 7, you know. And I've always believed, even just in general for evaluation committees, 5 to 7 is the right number. So I'm okay with 5 or 7, but again, what participation do you want? What stakeholders do you want on that committee? So again, as I said earlier, every procurement stands on its own. That's one of the things where that particular procurement would stand on its own. A more complicated CM at risk project, I'll probably have 7. A less complicated one, I might say 5 is enough, but I can't go beyond 7. The rules don't allow for it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, select a job order contractor, again by quality. You award a construction contract based on an agreed price determination. It could be RS means or a unit price book. It's all open book pricing. The pros are it's responsive to district needs. You get a quality contractor. The cons are the unit price techniques may be more expensive than regular bidding. You need board approval of any project over $1 million. The procurement rules basically say, hey, it's $1 million unless the board decides that it's going to be less or more, and you have to do that through board policy. So what that means is, let's say you had a project for $1.6 million. You might be able to do that as a jock contract, but the first thing the board would have to do is change their board policy to increase that $1 million. Because in your district, it's $1 million, so the only way you can change it is via board policy. The rules are very clear about that, okay? The nice thing about job order contracting, it is great for small repetitive projects. You can bring in these contractors. You can either select them based upon the qualifications, or you could ask for prices. There are job order contracts available through state contract, through 1GPA, through Mojave. You can bring those contractors in and ask them for prices. The disadvantage of asking them for prices instead of just picking a quality vendor is you've eliminated any ability for that vendor to come up with solutions for your construction project. You're telling them what you want, give me a price on that. So you've negated any input you could get from them. I like the qualifications-based process on the more complicated procurements, again, because now I'm getting input from that contractor. Okay? Any questions on job order contracting? All right, the last one is qualified select bidders list, and this one's really interesting. The cities, county, and state cannot do qualified select bidders list. This was put into Title 15. It was actually put in as one of those 2 a.m. amendments to a bill that got snuck in. Hey, you want me to vote for it? Stick this in. So it's qualified select bidders list. And this is kind of the best of both worlds. You're gonna basically, the RFQ is gonna be reviewed. You're gonna put out a qualifications-based process. You're gonna review it. You're gonna select the 3 to 5 most highly qualified contractors. Then you're gonna take those 3 to 5 and say, hey, come on, here's our clean cut specification. It's a hard bid process at that point. Instead of sending it out to the whole world, you're sending it out to the whole world, picking the 3 most highly qualified vendors, and then only allowing them to get to the second step, which is they are able to bid. So you heard me say the best of both worlds. You're getting a qualification base, and yet you're still getting a low bid possibility, because now you're into a regular bid process with the 3 to 5 most highly qualified contractors. Okay? You're going to award to the low responsible bidder. The pros are it's a qualification base. The bid process is familiar and well understood. Again, it emphasizes head-on competition. The cons are fewer bidders may reduce competition. The selected GC may not feel the pressure to make the lowest price because he doesn't have to compete against everybody. And it increases the procurement time by going through an RFQ first and then doing a secondary process, which is the bid. The other con that I just got reminded of this today, I was having lunch with one of our project managers at Valley Schools, and he says, you know, when you go low bid, they're going to be looking for those subcontractors that are the lowest cost, and they may not be the highest quality. So that could be another disadvantage. Any questions on qualified select bidders list?
I notice there's no construction manager risk aspect to it as far as finding ways to cut costs.
Not really, no, because you're just picking the most highly qualified and negotiating a price. Again, I would use this if I knew I could come up with a specification that's going to be clear, concise. I don't need all that input. It's an easy project. It's not complicated. Okay? All right. Okay. When can you use an APDM? We have to determine in writing that it's advantageous to the district, and the rules say the possible criteria could be cost control methods, value engineering, market conditions, scheduled, required specialized expertise, technical complexity of the project, and project management. This is right out of the procurement rules. Munch didn't make this up. This is what it says. These are the things we need to consider. Okay. Any questions on those? The district will just make that determination, and they can run with it at that point. The selection committee, we already talked about this. I'm not going to go through that again. Request for qualifications. Again, that request for qualifications is going to include a brief description of the scope of services. You have to have an initial budget estimate. The selection criteria are going to need to be listed, whether or not interviews are going to be held. Again, we're going to look at a single final list of at least 3, but not more than 5. And then we need to define what type of contract we're going to use. Evaluation and award, we're going to rank the submissions in order of preference based on the selection criteria. We negotiate with the highest qualified submitter, including compensation and other contractual terms. The district is going to consider value, scope, complexity, and the nature of the construction services. Again, if we're unable to negotiate a satisfactory contract in the first step, we can terminate negotiations and go to the second vendor. Under CM at risk, we can do that in the first step. If we're negotiating for the design services and we're unable to negotiate, we can go to number 2. But let's say we negotiate with the number 1, we negotiate a contract, we give them the design services, and they complete the design services, but we're unable to negotiate the GMP, the guaranteed maximum price. At that point, the rules do not allow us to go back to number 2. Once we award the first contract for design services, we're stuck with that vendor unless we want to just terminate negotiations and start with a whole new procurement. Do I have any questions on that? It's a nuance that a lot of districts miss, so I want to make sure you understand it. Once you initially award a contract to a vendor, we can't go to number 2. Once you act as a board and say, we're awarding this vendor a contract for the design, that's the contractor we're stuck with unless we want to just terminate negotiations. We can't go to number 2 at that point because we've already awarded a contract. The basic concept of public procurement is once we award a contract, the procurement's over. We can't go back into the procurement. If you can wrap your head around that, you can understand that concept. Any questions on that? Really important. A lot of districts want to go back to number 2 when there's a second step of negotiating the GMP, and you can at that point because you already have a contract in place. Questions on that? Okay. What are you negotiating? Depends on where you're at in the phase. The pre-construction services, you're negotiating those design services. The construction phase, again, we're negotiating the guaranteed maximum price, which includes the construction fee, overhead, profits, and any other possible conditions. And now just to kind of wrap up, alternative project delivery methods, any type of construction procurement is a 3-legged stool that includes the owner, the design professional, and the contractor. If we're weak in any of those places, the stool's going to be wobbly and it's going to collapse. It is definitely a 3-legged stool that we need to make sure everybody's on board. It's a contributory process. It's a collaborative process. That's what alternative project delivery method is all about. What it is, it's contractor selection based on value. It's based on opportunity for reduction of errors. It's based on opportunity for time and cost savings. What alternative project delivery method is not, it's not a guarantee of success. It's not an insurance against fraud, waste, or abuse. And it's not for those who don't want to stay actively involved in the process. Stuff I just want you to remember, it's not new. I already talked about it. It's been around since 2000. Many schools have used CMAR, job order contracting, qualified select bidders list successfully for several years. There's resources available. The new procurement rules are out again. They're pretty easy to use. Don't cut corners. It takes longer to do it right than to do it wrong. You're not alone. There's a lot of people that will help Liberty, not just me. Our school districts, we all talk to each other. We have listservs. We can ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. SFB is definitely a resource as well. All construction issues pretty much look the same once the contractor is selected. Let's just face it, no construction method is foolproof. You gotta stay involved. You gotta make those decisions. And as we make these decisions, we want to get input from the architect, from a project manager, from the contractor that we're dealing with. What's the best method to do this procurement? It's not a decision by procurement. It's not a decision by the construction department. It's a collaborative decision. How should we do this procurement? Looking at all the factors that we've talked about tonight. Other keys to success, it's going to reduce and eliminate changes. Make sure to do that. You want to have a clear scope of work, pre-construction involvement, reduce and eliminate changes, enhance your teamwork. You do that by effective communications, forming those business partnerships, developing the team over time, and establishing trust. Any questions on that slide? Okay. Any questions overall? I think I ran over my time. I apologize. I talked as fast as I could. I should have been an attorney, but oh well. Are there any general questions? Really what I wanted to do tonight was just give you a flavoring. This presentation really takes a couple hours for me to really get into it and say this is what it really means. And I would be happy to come back anytime you wanted me to and spend a couple hours. I'll spend a day with you if that's what you want to do. That's what I do for people. Trying to make this so it's not so difficult. But what I hoped I did tonight was just make it, at least you got a little feel, okay, these are the different choices. And you can definitely keep my PowerPoint, the information, it's not copyrighted. I want to share the information. I don't just do this for Liberty Elementary School District. I do it for school districts across the state because the more people that understand this, the better the procurements will be. the better construction procurements we have out there. So I just want to thank you once again for allowing me to come tonight. And again, are there any general questions that you were hoping I would answer when you saw the title on your agenda? I'm sure you said, I wonder what that guy's going to talk about. There you go. That's what I talked about.
what
And
I
I
do.
was going to say one more thing. I really feel good being up here because I used to be a board member, so I've been on both sides of the table. So I hope I helped. I tried to make it as simple as possible. Any questions? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was wondering if administration could share with the board what procurement process was used for the 2 construction projects that we have going.
Kelly, do you want to take that?
We use the SEAM at risk. So we use the construction manager at risk process. Thanks.
Okay.
Mr. President, Paul, you got a question? Go ahead.
Michael, I don't think you've asked a question, please.
I just,
Brochures.
one question early on in your presentation, Mr. Munch, and several times on the board, as we've talked about construction, we've heard qualified bidder. What defines qualified bidder?
That they
And
meet all the.
How do you unqualify a bidder? If you've had a problem with them in the past, what happens then?
Great question. If we've had issues with them in the past, we need to document those issues. We can definitely consider that as we look at qualified vendors. However, we can't summarily dock them every single time because that becomes what they call an ex post facto debarment, which means we're basically saying, hey, you messed up 10 years ago. We're going to hold that against you for the next 10 years. You cannot do that. You can definitely consider it because we're going to look at the history. We look at references of our own vendors. So you have to look, and that would be part of the evaluation. And we can definitely dock them points for not doing it. But we can't say to them, you know what, you messed up in our district. We're never doing business with you again. It's just not allowed by the procurement rules. Even vendors that violate the law can only be debarred up to 3 years, and then they're back. I mean, we got a vendor back in the 90s at the state that was debarred, and they're a very successful state contract vendor now today, and they were actually debarred for 3 years by the state back in the 90s. Again, and the whole reason for that is due process. But the answer to your question is we can definitely deduct points for, recent experience with them.
Okay, great.
But we
Thank
have
you.
to give them an opportunity to correct their situation as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hope that helps. Any other questions?
Brian? Paul? I guess the one question that I did have is, well, a couple questions.
Sure.
In your opinion, overwhelmingly, construction within the state, within the industry, how are those contracts awarded?
The majority of them right now.
Not public education, construction as an industry.
As an industry in public procurement within Arizona. There's a lot of construction manager at risk going on. There's a lot of
Outside of government, private entity.
I could not answer that for private entities. I would not even pretend to say that, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I haven't explored that. I concentrate on public procurement, so I just haven't done the research on that. I'd be happy to do the research and bring that information back to you at another date.
Because I'm just curious, we have some extremely large projects going within the valley right now. And I'm just curious how they go about it when they have the financial resources to be able to do all that needs to be done on a $20 billion project.
And they have the advantage of not having our strict procurement rules to follow.
That's what I'm
As
asking.
we look in that as we're in this fishbowl, we have to show our constituents that we're in compliance with the procurement rules. And unfortunately, compliance is more important than saving money at times. And
Well,
that's
what
just-
I'm asking, basically, kind of what I'm getting at is that you talked a lot about specs. And I do agree that that's what needs to be done, but isn't that what an architectural firm worth their salt is going to be top notch at?
That's what we hope they're going to do. But remember, I also talked about unforeseen conditions, that there's no way an architect would be able to look at those ahead of time. That's why they're unforeseen conditions. But the question becomes, is it really an unforeseen condition, or is it just something that they failed to look at? Kind of what you're pointing out.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Because I guess kind of the question and the thing that I just can't seem to wrap my head around is that you go around the valley and you look, now you can just watch it because everyone streams all their meetings, is that districts and taxpayers, us, for sitting up here, some out in the crowd, we're actually telling contractors how much we're willing to spend on a project before we actually even send it out for an RFQ. So how can a district get around any type of competitiveness to make it more competitive if you're already giving them the maximum price when you go out for a bond?
Yeah. You're giving them that, you have to give them that budget by the rules, but again, you're negotiating. What are we getting for that? So look at it this way, because I got into this discussion with my business manager because I wanted to do a procurement for copiers, just the way you're talking. Let's give them the budget up front. How much are we going to get for that budget? You're no longer competing the price. You're trying to see what can we do to maximize the budget. So in other words, you're taking your $20,000 that you have to go buy a car, and you're going to each dealership and saying, what car can you give me for this $20,000? And you're not going to pick the lowest cost because you've already got the $20,000, but what are you going to pick? You're going to pick the car that is the best value. And that's what we're talking about. And again, that's why it's qualifications based. It's a qualifications best value process. And you either wrap your head around it or you don't. The SFB does not wrap their head around that. They believe you got to go low bid every single time for all those BRGs. And okay, but it's not always the best way. Sometimes you want to look for the best value, and the only way to get best value is to use one of the alternative project delivery methods, in my humble opinion.
But with an RFQ process, there seems to be something that happens within the state when it comes to public education builds, that it seems like there's only 3 GCs that continually come up overwhelmingly over and over again. And it's my opinion that the reason why that is because of the RFQ process, and what districts aren't able to look at is that they can put all the bells and whistles on top of that package, and that the taxpayers, us, we're the ones paying for the marketing through this procurement process. So that's what I'm asking. How do districts get away from paying for that, of paying for that marketing, when we don't even know what their pricing is? Because that can't be shared. That's what I don't understand. How can pricing not be shared when a design is shown? It's either you have it this way or you have it that way.
Okay, but we can compare historically what have other districts gotten for this. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying I'm giving you the stock answer because it is tough. I sit here as a procurement person and say there's only 3 contractors I can award to. Something's wrong here. But I also see the other side of it where maybe it's because those are the only 3 contractors that want to do business with school districts. I don't know. Nobody really knows the answer. You're trying to wrap your head around something that's more philosophical than a procurement rule or a statute. But I'm with you because I've heard that same argument. How come there's only 3 contractors that want to do work for districts? I don't have that answer for you. I wish I did. I don't know. I do know that the processes work as long as you have the right people in place and you negotiate those contracts appropriately. We've been very successful building new schools using the CM at risk process across the entire state. I know that's working.
Are charter schools held to this same process?
Heck no.
Okay.
Do you want to know why? Because they have a law that says that a charter school can go to the state charter school board and ask for procurement exemptions, and 98% of them do that and they get a procurement exemption. So they're not held to following these rules. Just the way it is.
Because it's my understanding that charter schools don't necessarily use the same 3 contractors that you'll see public education use.
No, they can pretty much pick and choose what they want.
What I'm saying is we don't really see that even now. That you actually see different contractors on a charter school's new build construction site.
Right, because they don't have to jump through the hoops they would for a school district. But again, we're held to those high standards of the procurement rules. Procurement compliance is job 1. I'm not defending it, I'm just calling it what it is. We're more concerned about compliance with procurement than we are with absolutely saving money. I mean, I've been doing this for 35 years. I can come up with ways to save money that are not procurement compliant. I know they're the right thing to do, but they won't be procurement compliant. So I'm kind of reiterating what you're saying. You're absolutely right. Charter schools don't have to worry about that. They go to the charter school board, they get their exemption, and they don't have to follow the procurement rules.
Thank you, Mr. Munch. I appreciate your presentation.
No problem. I appreciate being here.
Mr. President, I have
I'll
one
always
more.
talk procurement. Sorry about that.
Mr. President, if I may have one more question.
Sure.
Along the lines of what Mr. Aguirre was asking about, would the use of a third-party estimator help to make sure that we're getting a fair pricing?
Through a project management company, you can absolutely get estimators, and yes, more data is always good. So could it help? Yes, it could possibly help.
Thank you.
Great question.
President Guire, members of the board, we have some construction projects coming up, so just wanted some feedback from you, hearing about some of these procurement options, ranging from, say, a Las Brisas Academy with addition of 4 classrooms, more defined, design overall with the rest of the school, compared to a transportation facility, and then down the road, within perhaps 2 years, having yet another school construction. So just wanted to know if the board had any direction for administration when we bring back a procurement option and starting down that process for approval. I just want to know if you have any direction for us initially.
Dr. Suff, it appears to me that the scope of both those are considerably different. The classroom rebuild would be a lot different to me as far as complexity than building a whole new building. Is it possible, I would think, to do maybe 2 different procurement strategies depending upon the project itself?
I would say yes.
For me, my opinion would be each individual project needs to be looked at individually. As far as for Las Brisas, those specs have already been made. That design's already been done. It should have been done. I believe that the architectural firm is the same as what we've used here recently. Am I correct?
For Las Brisas Academy, the 4 classrooms, there's not an architect design for those. There's space left to add on to the school, but there's not architectural design for those 4 classrooms.
I understand. What I'm saying is that the architectural firm that we used recently is the same one that designed Las Brisas, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So to me, those specs, that job has already been built. It is within a reasonable time frame. That, in my opinion, that construction materials, construction methods have not changed within that time period. And for me, I would look at a design bid build for something like Las Brisas. Because there's a lot of knowns and there's very few unknowns. Right?
I think it's my opinion that we need to take, like Mr. Aguirre said, that we need to take a look at these individually. Obviously, if we were in a smaller project that we're able to, itemize it out very clearly, the design bid build would be a better way to go. But I think we need to look at these individually as they come across.
Michael, anything more?
No, I would agree. I think we might be getting a little far past what our agenda item is, which was procurement methods. There's not really much discussion forward, so I would just caution the board that we probably should bring this up for a later board meeting to discuss further.
So administration had asked for some direction. Is that giving some direction to start moving forward for some of these other things? Or is there any specific questions?
Just we're looking for direction. We lined out the different procurement methods. The soonest project that's coming up is the additional classrooms. And so we were specifically at least hoping to get some good direction on the method that you thought might be most appropriate for that.
Is there some feedback that you've gotten that you might be able to come up with something at this point?
Before you answer that, could I just offer up one thing? And I agree with you, Mark, that because the specs are so solid with the classrooms, I don't think we need to go anything beyond the the BBD, BDD, DBB, whatever the first one was.
I would reiterate that it is already a constructed building with the Las Brisas School, but the design for the 4 classrooms, that's going to be, I mean, it'll be connected to the building, but it's a standalone project, so it's not designed. That's what we put the RFQ out for, the architect design services to actually design what that will look like. It's definitely a small project, so it is more, I mean, it doesn't have restrooms, it's connecting to the current building, so it is definitely a smaller project.
If I can throw some in, I feel like there's information we just don't have. It's kind of almost like putting the cart before the horse. For me, if the two we're looking at as DBB and CMAR, I mean, it'd be better for me personally if we're coming to a project and you were able to sit there and bring forward, look at this is what we're looking at, give something to the board for us to grab onto. I just don't feel I have enough information to really give valuable feedback at this time.
Thank you. We'll bring something back when we're ready to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Munch.
Again, I want to thank the board for having me here tonight, and I'm available to the district at any time they have any questions about procurement, because I'm about all things procurement. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2.2, trimester 1 benchmark data. Ms. Jacobs.
Good evening, Governing Board President, members of the Governing Board. I'm going to steal the microphone for a moment from Ms. Jacobs just to give you a little bit of background before we dig into the data. You probably were needing to wear your glasses as you were looking at the spreadsheet, so we're going to make them a little bit bigger for you. But again, just a little bit of background to help build where our students have been over the last 2 years. The last normal school year for our students was 2 years ago. That means that a current 5th grader's last normal school year was when he or she were in 3rd grade. Last year's pre-assessment data, when we presented it to you, did not show significant gaps in learning, as we were only out of school for 2 months prior that spring. The students who took the first trimester assessment last year are different from the students that you'll see their data this year. Some are attending in person for the first time in more than a year, and as many as 500 are new to our school district this year. This year on the surface, it looks like school is in person and it appears that school is back to normal. However, both student and teacher attendance are significantly lower than in pre-COVID years, which reduces our children's learning opportunities. All of these pandemic-related issues for the last year and a half now impact this year's data. When children are more than 1 year below grade level, the assessment becomes very rigorous for them to be able to demonstrate their academic growth when evaluated using an on-grade level assessment. And that's what we're going to show you tonight. In the data that's being presented tonight, you're going to see decreases in proficiency, showing areas where learning is not yet steadily progressing. And you're also going to see some areas of growth and proficiency that are greater than they have been in 2 years. Overall, in analyzing the district data, we noticed an overall more ELA, which is English Language Arts, percent passing than mathematics across the board. The more affluent schools showed higher percentages of passing overall, following a similar trajectory as the poverty rate. We did see instances of growth at all sites. However, the overall instances also follow a similar trajectory as the poverty rate. 4th grade students in the district positively stand out, and our overall intermediate levels, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, showed more growth and proficiency than any other grade levels in both English Language Arts and mathematics. I'm going to have Katie share with you some standout site data and or trends.
Good evening, Mr. President and school board members. I'm happy to share the site level data with you. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger for you, actually. All right. I'll present to you in the order of the poverty rate, starting with freedom. While the majority of students are in the developing emerging levels, which are the bottom two levels, fifth grade ELA did stand out, showing an increase in percent passing over 2 years. So even though they did go down in 2021, they shot back up, showing more growth than any, more growth considerably compared to the other sites. At Rainbow Valley, also the majority of students falling in developing and emerging in both ELA and math. Some standout areas are second, 6th, and 8th grade. Their ELA growth is actually above the district average. So this is 6th grade ELA. District average was a -2, and they're up at 11. It's instances when our lower poverty rate schools are above the district average, especially in growth. Look at 2nd grade for Rainbow. Although in the negative, not as low as the district average. And 8th grade ELA. Although at 0, an increase from last year and above the district average. Taking a look at Liberty, with the exception of 4th grade ELA, in all grade levels, the majority of students are in the developing and emerging levels. 4th grade ELA at Liberty showed the most growth in the district. Also an increase in percent passing over 2 years. 6th grade math also at Liberty. That is ELA. Here we go. Had nice movement and an increase in growth. The next school is looking at Blue Horizons, and since it's their first year, we don't have a lot of data to look at trends, but we did see a high proficiency with percent passing in 2nd grade ELA at 49%, well above the district average percent passing. Las Brisas Academy showing several areas of growth in both ELA and math across several grade levels. In particular, percent passing following the district trend of those intermediate grade levels. Specifically, 4th and 5th grade math is trending up over time. 4th grade math at Las Brisas also had a significantly low amount of students in the emerging. And then that trend kind of continued, and so their percent passing was very high for trimester 1. 5th grade ELA and math stood out with significant high growth and percent passing both in ELA and math. %, and they took a big jump, 39, 34, and 71. You don't see that very often. And over in math. -19-point difference compared to the district average of -2. Very strong 5th grade team. While middle school ELA is showing growth at Las Brisas, the middle school math is trending in the opposite direction. Estrella is also showing areas of growth in both ELA and math. In particular, percent passing in ELA is trending up over time in the intermediate levels also. For math, with the exception of 4th grade, 3rd through 8th grade math percent passing is also trending up. At Estrella, third grade stands out with some significant growth and percent passing, growth over time, over the last couple years, and high percent passing. And that was third grade math. And then third grade ELA, also growth over time, with actually the only positive growth for third grade ELA this year for trimester 1. Fifth and eighth grade ELA also stood out with high growth and percent passing at Estrella. Westar had pockets of growth showing percent passing, trending up over time, along with higher passing rates. Some standout areas at Westar is sixth grade. Both ELA and math showing high growth and percent passing. It is always, it's statistically typical that middle school is typically harder for students to show high growth and continue to exceed at a high level. So Westar sixth grade showing growth and higher achievement in both ELA and math is standout data. Fourth grade math at Westar also had some gains. So not only did they have high percent passing, significantly low numbers in students in the emerging category, that bottom category, they also had some good growth. That is fourth grade math. Eighth grade ELA showed positive growth over time as well at Westar. Significant gains there from 22 a couple years ago to nearly 60% right now. Fifth grade math and ELA showed a drastic drop in performance when looking at grade level data at Westar. Those are just some brief snapshots of standout data or trends by site. Do you have any questions about site data before I give it over to Natasha?
Yeah, thank you very much, and congratulations on fourth grade overall. It looks great. I'm impressed that they're coming along. Before we get too much discussion of the numbers, just refresh me real quickly. The benchmark that we're looking at was written by us, correct?
Yes, the items are not all written by us. The items, the questions per test, per grade level, they're not many of them at all are written by us, but the tests are put together by us, yeah.
And it mirrors very closely what the state would have as far as format on the testing that we'll see from them, is that correct?
Yes, the items and the cut points that they use to create our proficiency levels, they use the state results to do that.
And that brings us to the numbers. With fourth grade overall, have we been able to dig down deep enough to know why that in particular, that grade level is doing differently than the others?
We haven't, but there has been over the past, and I've just only been here a couple years, a big focus on K-3 literacy. That would be my first inference.
We're benefiting from the work that was done earlier, is what you're saying. Is that correct? Okay, so the investment we made in 2, 3, 4 is now or 2, 3 is now showing up in 4.
And I would predict even more so after this year.
I also noticed there was one of the schools, one of their grade levels, all of their grade levels appeared to be performing over 50% with different variations on growth and so on, all but one grade level. And I'm wondering, I assume that we've done some looking into why that grade level at that school is trending out of the norm.
Yes, many of the sites have been digging into the data down to the grade level, down to the teacher, for specific reasons and trends, looking at different things. And like Tasha said, some of that being teacher or student attendance. We've also had different teachers at different sites over time. But yes, that is being looked into.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and it's worrisome that we have that one. It just stands out so much that it seems unusual. We also have a couple of schools where, and I really appreciated the trends that you identified. I found them to be helpful as far as what I was looking at, but I also found that I was in great agreement with most of them too. I thought, oh, you're right. This is exactly what it looks like. But I'm worried that we have two schools where the statement follows it that no grade level or content area at 50% passing. Is that not scary?
Well, I do want to remind you that our AZ merit or our AZM scores, right, this past year were in the 30%. So yes, it's alarming, but we have room to make up from 2 years, right, of not having the normalcy of the education that we've been providing. So when we look at not making 50% or more, we are also alarmed by that, but we were in the 30% for AZM2. So we're making up from where we started. Does that make sense, Ms. Bixler?
I understand what you're saying, yes.
Can you also add state average?
State average for all of the grade levels, and I'm going to look to you about this, but I don't think any grade level this past year was above 40% as a state average.
State average. Okay.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of segue from Paul there. You mentioned that this is a program that's been put in a few years ago, and you're seeing growth. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly? This is the third year for some of these programs?
Ms. Jacobs spoke to an investment in our primary grades and literacy, and even a greater investment, particularly this year.
Okay, that's correct. Okay, where I'm getting at here is, how many students did you say were new to the district?
Over 500.
How do you see that affecting these overall standards? Because I'm kind of personal experience here. There was a lot of growth needed for my children in the school, and we thought we were doing okay. Is that affecting these overall scores we're seeing?
The new students coming into our district, your question is that affecting our overall scores that we're seeing?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. And we don't necessarily have a baseline of where they were last year in comparison, right, of the students that stay with us year over year. So it would be interesting to look at what we call our full academic or FAE students to see kids that stayed with us, how are they doing in comparison to our new students that are joining us.
Okay, yeah, I kind of saw it firsthand, and I know in our situation we've had to really work hard to bring things up, and we thought we were doing pretty good overall. It just goes to show how well the school district in general is doing, and I'm very pleased. Do you have anything that maybe this district could add to assist those kids in coming up to speed, or?
Well, we currently provide interventions. We currently have tutoring available after school, and a majority of our teachers are providing small groups based upon data that they're collecting formatively, daily within the classroom, based on where students are performing on end of lesson assessments. So at this point, I think we're doing a pretty good job with that, and I don't know, it kind of reminds me of the little train that could, right? We have a steep mountain to climb, and we are making progress with it. I do think it's going to take some time.
Right. No, I agree. I think you guys are doing a great job. Thank you very much.
Michael?
I'd like to thank my fellow board members for taking all my thunder and asking all my questions, so Ms. Camp's off the hot seat. But I do have a couple, so don't sit down quite yet. Just a question. In the future, could we kind of compare this report to our peer districts? Because it seems like it would show give us a good baseline of not only what we're doing internally, but how we're doing against our other comparisons. We put a lot of money into the classroom, and I think we could really show our taxpayers some success. The other question I would have, I'll just give them to you both, and then you can answer them or not, I suppose, but I hope you do. Given the large number, we kind of have, as you said, 500 new students. That's an anomaly that we have no control over.
Correct.
We could very easily get 500 students, which in a district our size, I would think statistically that could really lower our percentages. Is there a way that we can administer some sort of an entry test or a baseline test? I don't know if there's any legal term that we need to use, so that we could identify where they were coming in at. Because if we could show that 500 students came in at a very low level, we could probably show that our numbers really were better until we got other students that came in. And I think that would help us tell our story a little better. So that's probably some work for you all, but in the same token, I think it would help us to have a better picture of, and we're only, I think 500 is a low number. We're probably going to see many more large numbers over the next few years. So we're going to battle this anomaly for a long time with an unknown, and we could tell our story better with some sort of a baseline, and maybe even exclude those in the report for a short, for a year or so till we get them up to standard. We've shown that when we take our 2 and 3s and we put 4th on them, we get good numbers in 4. But now we just bring in a whole bunch of others. So it's just food for thought, and maybe you could comment or come back to us later.
Let me try to answer your first question. So, how should I say this nicely about the state of Arizona? Every school district has different benchmark assessments. So when you ask if we can compare it to our peer districts, we would not be able to do that unless we administered the exact same assessment.
Okay.
I do not know that anyone has an exact same assessment as we do. So, and let me remind you that, as Ms. Bixler was saying, we develop our benchmark assessments based upon the essential standards that our teachers are teaching in that trimester. I don't know very many other districts that do it that way, and we're a little bit of an anomaly because we are on trimesters. Many other districts are quarters. So there's also a discrepancy in the duration of time of when our children would test. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Could we do that then yearly, like as a final? And then the question is, if our standards are here, but our standards are a little higher than the others, that wouldn't be a fair comparison either. And I would like to
Correct.
think that knowing a lot of the teachers and being in some classrooms, we do have some pretty high standards. So a 30%, just to pick a number, in our classroom may be equivalent to a 50% at a school down the road. So
Yes, and I
may be another
think,
problem.
Mr. Todd, that in working with Project Momentum, remember we have a Project Momentum grant, when we get our AASA results, formerly known as AZM2, so when we get this year's state level test results, we can actually show you comparatively where we are across the state.
Great.
And I think that would be something that you would like to see, and then, with sister districts as well as peer districts.
That'd be great.
And we should also have access to full academic year data comparative to our, overall all data. So that's data we can get to at the annual state level testing. But
Thank you.
And then just to answer your final question about the baseline data, so our pre-assessments every year that we give the very second week of school, those give us that gives us baseline data on where students are currently with the current grade level standards. So it's a little bit hard to take in at first. So imagine, you're a 4th grade teacher. I'm brand new to your classroom. You're giving me a pre-assessment on 4th grade standards. I'm probably not going to do very well because I haven't learned the 4th grade standards. So then what we do is on our post-assessment, which is at the end of the year, this is an apples to apples assessment. We are wanting to see how much has Tasha grown in your classroom from day one that she was in 4th grade to last day that she was in 4th grade. That's where we do a true comparison of pre-post.
So, and that's great. The problem still becomes that if we've got 500 kids coming in that are well below that, so just for those students that are coming in, if they're coming into the 4th grade, maybe we should give them a 3rd grade test to see where they're at. And when they come in at 30% of 3rd grade, we know that number is going to be down. And then at the end of the year, hopefully we see a big increase. And then we show truly what our teachers have done. Because if we've got a low number, we separate that group, and then we show being 1 year in our school, 2 years in our school, they're making exponential growth. That tells our story, and that tells the taxpayers that this is a good district, or one of many tools that would show them that that's the case.
Yes, and I think we can run a FAY report as well, like you were saying, Dr. Schuff, at the state level also when the reports come out, just to show if you're with us for 1 year, this is how much you grow. If you're with us for 2 years, this is how much you grow. If you're with us for 3 years, this is how much you grow. So that's going to show us over time too. Do we grow the students that we keep with us more than we do those that are migrant or more mobile in and out of the district?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one last question, if you mind. I apologize for not asking this earlier. The assessment that was taken recently, the benchmark, is based upon the standards that were going to be taught at that time. Did we teach all those standards?
We have a pacing guide, and our pacing guide tells us when we should be teaching those standards. I cannot tell you that all of those standards were taught equally by every single teacher. I am hopeful that they were taught by every single teacher. Things happen though, right? Teachers are out ill, they get behind in pacing, they're trying to make up, what standards they're spending most of their time on, but there is adequate time to teach those standards within the trimester.
So we had the time.
That part is the challenge. So if we had teacher absences, and so the opportunity to learn is not as strong with a guest teacher, or when we have to split classes. The opportunity to learn is not as strong when students, parents have opted to quarantine their children, and so they're out for 10 days at a time, and maybe more than 1 or 2 or 3 times during this time period. So the opportunity to learn, it appears on the surface that we are back in school in person, but make no mistake, we are still struggling with the challenges to give our children the opportunity to learn.
Thank you. Item 3.1. Anyone have any updates? Paul? Brian?
I do. I got to attend the EMES choir concert on the 10th, and I have to tell you, it was wonderful. They did a lot of patriotic songs, and one of the things that kind of came to mind and was really tough for me was, God, please don't make us remove these types of programs because of our override issue. I mean, that was the first thing that came to mind. Those kids did a wonderful job. That was it.
Michael?
A couple things. I would echo Board Member Parks' report on the choir performance. I was there as well, and absolutely fantastic. If you're looking for something to do at a very affordable rate, you'll feel nothing but ripped off going there for free and listening to their performance, because they're good. Brian and I almost started two-stepping together out there, so we didn't think that was going to pass the headline so well if we took over the party there, but it was great performance, and I would just really thank the staff and the choir director there. She's done a great job and just super enthusiastic. The other thing we got to do is participate in a walkthrough of the Liberty School new construction, and kind of go through and identify some questions and both good and bad of that school. We've sent that information on to Dr. Schuff, who will work with our contractors to address concerns, and certainly appreciate that opportunity. I think that was important. It was good to see an entire board present for that. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any calls to the public? Consent agenda, does anyone have anything that they want pulled?
5.3, please.
Hearing no one else, I'd entertain a motion to approve consent agenda with the exception of item 5.3.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the consent agenda with the exception of item 5.3.
I second the motion.
So we have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously. Item 5.3, go ahead, Michael.
Mr. President, as you know, I've expressed lots of concerns over resignations. We have two more this time around. And again, this is becoming a very concerning trend. I recognize it's happening all over the state. Crime happens all over the state. It doesn't make it right. So that's not an excuse for me to hear that. I'm very bothered in the impact of this, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I think there's some language in here that may be considered confidential. However, what I will say is both of these cite an issue that is of concern to me from a district perspective, and if this is truly how our staff is starting to feel, then our administration must prioritize this immediately ahead of everything else and start taking a look at this. But I can also tell you that I've been stopped at 2 different grocery stores in the area by staff who have also stated very similar things. So I think as a board, we need to prioritize this issue. We have asked for some liquidated damages and discussion to be started. I don't want to see that dropped on us at the last second when new contracts come out, and this needs to be addressed. So I support everything else in the consent agenda, but I am struggling here with these requests for resignation and leaving our students once again high and dry. We seem to be losing more teachers than we're hiring in our staff reports, and that continues to be a concern for me.
Can I kind of add on that a little bit? I kind of went through it, and I've seen, I think, 6 resignations. It's disturbing because we're seeing a theme kind of roll through. And one of the concerns I have is, teachers are signing a contract. They understand what the workload is. They understand what the responsibility is, but we're just decide we don't want to do it anymore. That's a problem. If we're looking through the resignations, they all kind of have the same theme. It also tells me that we're not getting to the bottom of what the problems are. There's more. There's something else here. There's something brewing. I think we need to get to the bottom of it. I'm not sure how we get to the bottom of it. I'm not sure if we interview the exit interviews. I'm not sure, but we got to understand what's going on because it's the responsibility of the board to take some sort of action to make sure that we address this. And if it's pay, if it's discipline in the classroom, I don't know what it is, but I just looking at these, I'm getting really concerned. So I would ask that the administration find a way to dig into these a little bit. And I don't know how we get a report back to the board, how we kind of get an idea of what's going on, but I think this needs to be addressed.
It's my understanding that every employee has the opportunity to fill out an exit interview. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can we force them to do that?
We cannot force them to do an exit interview. We can ask them to, and most comply.
Can we not put that in future contracts that they need to fill out an exit interview prior to leaving?
I can seek some advice from the attorney on whether or not we can put that in there.
Do you see what we're getting at here? I mean, if there's some underlying issues that teachers aren't willing to talk about, and something going on in the classroom or some other thing that we're not aware of, we can't help. I don't think teachers are just walking away because they just want to walk away. I have to believe there's something else going on here.
With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve item 5.3.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we approve 5.3 with the exception of the resignations.
I'll second.
So there's a motion on the floor to approve item 5.3 with the exception of resignations. All those in favor? Paul? Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
All those opposed? Paul?
Nay.
I am also an A. So it's my understanding that when it comes to resignations with certified staff, that it's in the language already and in policy already that suitable replacements are staffed before. Dr. Schuff?
I believe the policy reads that, that the board may approve based on a suitable replacement, but it does not require the board to approve the resignations with a suitable replacement.
So I guess that's kind of the question that I have for the board, is this where it's at this point? Anyone who doesn't want to work in the district anymore, we just don't approve their resignation. Because I think the moment that you start singling out certified staff versus non-certified staff, we're going to go ahead and put the district in some legal jeopardy. But I guess that would be up to the individual board members. We're still on item 5.3 with discussion.
And I understand that within policy, we do have the ability to hold up a resignation depending upon the finding an appropriate replacement.
That's the way I
I don't know if
understand
that
it
would
also.
be a middle ground that would be acceptable or not.
Yeah, that's the way I understand it also, is it's already in policy, but
That was my understanding. that-
Mr. President, I would be fine.
Yeah.
Once we have a suitable full-time replacement in those spots that equals their position, then I have no problem. But right now, our staffing levels are too low. We've got 37 kids in one classroom that I know of. Our numbers are too high, and our substitute level is too low. Permanent teachers or guest teachers are resigning. We have to have a plan in place. So I'm all for accepting the resignation of these two teachers once a suitable replacement is in place. But they have a contract with us, and I'm more than willing to take on your concern of a legal document by simply being able to show a judge, here's a contract, this is what it means. If they're just toilet paper, then let's call it that, and we can save a lot of time and money. We can probably save budget and get rid of a lot of human resource people that don't have to manage contracts. But until we have a suitable replacement, I don't feel that we can do this to our teacher, to our students, or to our staff. Somebody's going to have to cover these classes. Everybody's going to have to do onboarding, retraining. That's taking away from our mission. And when we have numbers that some are good, but some are not good, we don't have time to be playing this game any longer. And it's time that this district gets serious and we hold teachers to the agreement. We pay them every 2 weeks. We give them benefits. We build new schools. We give them good everything. And this is what we get in return. They need to think about that. And if signing a contract for 1 year is something that's not good for them, then they should probably consider a different profession.
So I'd also like to point out to the board that this board has had the opportunity to change policy when it comes to this. We're in the middle of the contracts currently, in the teacher contracts. There are no liquidated damages. That the board will have that opportunity come later, it'd be into 2022, which would roughly be February, March. That at that point, that if the board so chooses, that could be a discussion item. But again, I'd like to emphasize to the board that these contracts have already been issued, that the board within the contracts did not have any liquidated damages. So that shoe that you're talking about of, well, they have a contract and they're not following it. Well, I'd go ahead and say the district, by what is being suggested, is not following their part of the contract either.
Mr. President, we did not ask for liquidated damages for these two teachers to be paid for. What we ask is for them to stay on until a suitable replacement is found, identified, and hired and retained, and that is part of their current contract. So we're not asking for anything more than what's in their contract right now today.
Mr. Guerra, may I ask for Mr. Nuttall to explain the process and timeline of what happens if they are not approved this evening and the delay of that for hiring?
Well, as an example, board members, typically what we do is as soon as a resignation comes through, we post for the position because we realize that every 2 weeks, that time frame is really, really important for us to be able to try and hit a time frame to minimize the disruption. As an example here, you'll see a Blue Horizons resignation. You'll also see on the top line, there's a new hire at Blue Horizons that is the suitable replacement. Sometimes we get lucky. This particular case, we were able to find a suitable replacement for that particular resignation. We do not, however, have a suitable replacement yet for the Las Brisas. And the reason for that is because it's a special area and they're a little bit harder to find. We have had some interest from guest teachers who have some qualifications in that particular area that we intend to fill. So the kids will have minimal disruption. You'll also notice that the Las Brisas has given us some extended time to find a suitable replacement until the end of the semester. There's no guarantees, but this is a decent transition time for us as students are graduating from programs, internship, student teaching, et cetera. So it does inhibit our ability, should we have a replacement, if the board not accept the resignation. What would happen in this particular case is we would have to reassign this particular certified teacher at Blue Horizons if the resignation wasn't accepted.
Mr. President, I feel like that statement tries to hold us hostage. We have a resignation. We need to find somebody. If we take a guest teacher and we move them into this spot in a permanent, that's fine. But this resignation has still left a gap in our staffing model currently. So at that point, we'd need to find a new guest teacher. It needs to be a 1-for-1. I find it ridiculous to say that we can't post a position for somebody for this spot, even if they're here. And when we find that person, we can approve this resignation. But companies do that all the time in the private sector. You know somebody's leaving, they post that position, it's posted, when they get that person hired or whatever time that is, it moves on. But I find it ridiculous that we have to wait for this person to vacate their spot before we start looking for a suitable replacement. If that's the case, then the entire language in our contract is wrong, and we've got bigger problems, which I think that contract already is a big problem, but you can't fill this spot with a guest teacher permanently and then leave a guest teacher spot open. That still leaves us one less staff person in this district.
Mr. Todd, as soon as we receive a letter of resignation, we do post and start searching.
Okay.
That does not necessarily mean we can hire for them. We do post for it. In this particular instance and several others throughout, as Mr. Parks noted, the multiple resignations. when we do find a certified replacement, suitable replacement, our goal is to minimize the disruption for kids. In this particular case, we will have had a 1-day minimized disruption for those students at Blue Horizons should this be approved. My point is that as soon as we receive a resignation, we absolutely post and start searching.
How do we make these resignations contingent on fulfilling the position? I mean, it seems to me that's what we're looking for here, and if it's already been done, it seems like the discussion as it moves forward, it's kind of it's solved itself. So as far as the board's concerned, no, we're not going to. As it stands, I don't want to, I'm not going to approve a resignation. But if we do it based on the fact that the position's being filled, I don't understand why at that particular point we can say then the resignations are accepted. Is that something we can do?
So, board policy reads that a release from an uncompleted contract may be granted contingent upon the availability of a well-qualified certificated teacher as a replacement. So in other words, that could be part of your motion.
Yes, I think.
And I'm fine with that as well. But with that, if we're taking a guest teacher and we're moving her or him into this spot, and we're now vacating another position in the district, then we have not fulfilled. We're still down one staff member. So we need to fill, if we have, for round numbers, if we have 10 staff members prior to this resignation, this person leaves, we're down to 9. We backfill a guest teacher into that role, we're still sitting at 9. So we need to start with 10, end with 10 in order for this to be a true replacement, especially with our staffing numbers at this time. And at that point, I'm perfectly fine accepting any resignation.
Mr. Todd, there are a number of personnel issues where one person fills another position. There's often is a domino effect in staffing. And to make that exception in this situation would be problematic for the district.
Well, but what's problematic is these teachers violate breaking their contract and leaving us shorter staff than we were when we started. That's where the root of the problem is.
I completely agree. It is a problem we are facing in the district.
So, as I said, I'm happy to accept these resignations. I will make the motion to accept these resignations when the position is adequately filled, and if there's another vacancy caused in the district by that filling, that position needs to be filled as well. We need to maintain staffing levels. However we do it, we need to maintain staffing levels. And contract is a written or spoken agreement, especially when concerning employment, sales, or tenancy that is intended to be enforceable by law. We're not holding them we're not holding them to anything other than what they've agreed to. A suitable replacement. But I'm quite sure that a suitable replacement does not mean leaving us down one staff member in the district, especially at this time when we're at below critical staffing levels.
So I guess the question I'd have, Michael, is where do we go find teachers? You said we got to do something. So you made the statement, and I'd like to know where we find them. What shelf do we go to get a teacher?
That's an entirely different discussion. But right now, and that's not part of the open meeting agenda at this time. If we want to put that on agenda, I would wholeheartedly support that we do a work session to look at how we recruit more teachers. But currently, our agenda item is these 2 resignations, and I'm not in favor of letting these resignations go until we have a suitable replacement and not a drop in staff.
Actually, there's more than 2 resignations.
Well,
There's multiple.
there's 2 certified teacher resignations that have a contract. None of the other ones, to my knowledge, have contracts.
And what happens if the board doesn't approve any of the resignations? Do the teachers stay? Does that just fix it? Do they stay?
They do not stay.
They still leave.
My guess would be is that, we have one until, in this particular case, we have one until December 17th. My hope is that that person stays until that date. The 26th was the effective date on the resignation, and that person would not stay.
I'm not arguing the fact that there's an issue.
If we don't draw a line in the sand somewhere, we're going to have larger problems. We have to send a message, and we have to do what we keep saying is stability for our students, teaching our students, and we're not doing that with teachers leaving like this. They've signed contracts. That's what a contract is. It's basic. This is something we should be teaching probably in 3rd or 4th grade, what a contract is.
I also want to add something. We talked, it was the first meeting I was at, we talked about, the liquidated damages, and we actually had a conversation about what was acceptable, what wasn't, what was a good reason for resigning. Neither one of these even comes close to a reason to resign. I look at this and go, man, in my world, it's like, look, you know what? I'm sorry your workload's too much. I'm sorry that, maybe things you don't like it here. But you know what? Too bad. There's kids. And I think, when we talk about what's acceptable and what isn't, just because you don't want to work anymore isn't an acceptable reason to just throw in the paperwork and resign. There is a contract.
So to stay on topic, I'd entertain a motion to approve item 5.3.
Just a real quick question before we do that. Jason, is a guest teacher considered a position within this district? I know that we have guest teachers that are permanent guest teachers. But would that be considered a position within the district that would need to be filled if it becomes vacant? As we are with a certified teacher in a classroom?
I think depending on the way you look at it, it's a bottomless pit or a ceilingless sky. We hire them until we can't hire them any longer. So our goal is to hire as many guest teachers every single board meeting as we possibly can for a lot of reasons, right? Staff attendance that's been addressed tonight, that's one. But we also have some resignations that if we can fill, we do. But there's no limit on how many subs. I've mentioned before, I think in the previous board meeting, we did a study on our fill rate. We did a study on our capture rate. As a result, we at one point in time had 70 to 80 subs in our pool. We now have 39 active subs. So I will mention that Ms. Camacho, just one final point on this particular resignation. So Ms. Camacho, top line, is a highly qualified, certified teacher, not a previous sub. She's a brand new applicant to our district who is intended to take the place of the resignation at Blue Horizons. In that particular case, that's a straight 1-for-1. We didn't lose a sub to put into that particular classroom. At this point in time, Las Brisas, we do not have a certified replacement.
And Las Brisas is the resignation will come due on December 17th.
The resignation is coming to you today, but effective on the 17th.
Effective.
Yes. So we would really have 2 more weeks to try and find a suitable replacement for that up until the next board.
Mr. President, we have dealt with a lot of resignations so far this year, and I understand your concern, Michael. I agree with it, but I don't think this is time to change it. So I move that we approve item 5.3.
So the motion, is there a second? So I second. All those in favor to approve item 5.3? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Nay.
Michael?
Nay.
I am also an aye. All those opposed? Brian?
Opposed.
Michael?
I'm opposed as well.
Show that the motion failed. Item 5.3, nothing is to move forward with item 5.3. Show that the records reflect that.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? I believe staff did advise that the Blue Horizons teacher does have a suitable replacement, can start immediately. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So if that is the case and that's not pulling from our sub pool or our staffing, Mr. President, if you would, I would make a motion that we approve the resignation of Celine Aguirre. I'm not sure how you say that one. It's a little different spelling than yours, sir. Given that there's a suitable replacement immediately available.
Kill the damn thing.
I'll second it.
So there is a motion and a second to only approve Celine Aguirre's resignation.
Okay.
All those in favor, say aye. Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Show that all resignations are not accepted within item 5.3 except for Celine Aguirre.
Mr. Chairman, I want to clarify, I was accepting all resignations. The only
That
one
isn't
I'm
what the
not,
motion said, Mr. Todd.
well, we're
The
still on
motion
it. We
was
can bring
very
it back up.
specific, and if board secretary would like to ring it back or read it back, that would be greatly appreciated.
Approve item 5.3 with only the resignation of Ms. Aguirre.
Okay, well, we're still on it, so we could bring this back up for a clarification, a clarifying vote. We have not left the agenda item. So I would make the motion that we approve. We clarify the previous motion that I made, and we approve all resignations with the exception of Carrie Kennedy, given that our only other certified resignation on this is Celine Aguirre, and she does have a suitable replacement, which is in line with the current contract language.
Second.
Do I have a motion to approve item 5.3 with the exception of Carrie Kennedy? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I'd
Aye.
like to clarify there was also a second. All those in favor, say aye. Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
All those opposed? Myself, I am opposed. Show that the motion carried 3-1. I'd like to explain my nay is simply because this is a special type of certification, and these individuals are extremely hard to find, which is why that replacement has not been found at this point. But I trust that it will be found.
Mr. Chairman, I too would like to explain my vote, and it is along the same lines of yours. These positions are extremely difficult. This puts us in a larger lurch than perhaps a normal, maybe normal is the wrong term, but a standard classroom teacher. These are highly qualified, and these students definitely need a highly qualified student. So when you sign up for that, we need those expertise. So
item 6.1, discussion of district versus board committees. Mr. Haas.
sure I know. President Guire, members of the board, Dr. Schuff, pleasure to be here this evening.
wanted to give the board some information about open meeting law compliance. Also applaud you for your compliance mindset in this area. And talk about advisory committees and subcommittees in the open meeting law.
Mr. Hawes, can you move the microphone closer?
Yes. So to start off with, just a review of who must comply with the open meeting law, and by statute that is public bodies. The state statute defines public body to include school boards. And is there a pointer on this? Okay. Includes school boards and all standing special or advisory committees or subcommittees of or appointed by the public body. So we're looking at two main things to decide if somebody is subject to the open meeting law. Is it a standing special or advisory committee? And if so, is it of or appointed by the public body? Both those requirements must be met. State statute also defines advisory committees or subcommittees to mean any entity, however designated, meaning the name, what you call it, doesn't really control, but any entity, however designated, that is one, officially established on motion and order of a public body, or by the presiding officer of the public body. The presiding officer is the board president, not the superintendent. And whose members have been appointed for the specific purpose of making a recommendation concerning a decision to be made or considered, or a course of conduct to be taken or considered by the public body. Okay, so break that down a little bit to decide, as you look around at the district, to decide if something is an advisory committee or subcommittee. Ask yourself, one, was it officially established on motion and order of the public body or by the presiding officer? If the answer to that is no, then it's not a advisory committee or a subcommittee. If the answer to that is yes, then you also have to look at the and whose members have been appointed for the specific purpose of making a recommendation. Is that their purpose? If so, is the recommendation concerned a decision to be made or considered, or a course of conduct to be taken or considered by the public body? Is it ultimately going to come back to you for action? That's what we're looking at. So if it is a public body, as defined, it's subject to the open meeting law, which means there would have to be notice of that committee's meeting. There would have to be a posted agenda. The public would have the same rights they have in tonight's meeting to come, attend, listen, videotape if they want to, and minutes would have to be maintained and posted as as they are. So a significant extra layers of requirements and add quite a bit of delay in the process. So the open meeting law does create a lot of transparency, creates opportunities for the public to have input, but if any of these committees are subject to the open meeting law, it's going to slow things down, obviously. And that's the trade-off that the legislature has set out. In addition to the statute, the Arizona Attorney General's Office, which enforces the open meeting law, has created what they call an agency handbook to offer additional guidance to all the state agencies. A school district is a political subdivision. Also, the guidance in the agency handbook is applicable to school districts as well. So the agency handbook provides that a special or standing committee may consist of members of the public body who have been appointed by or authorized to act for the public body. So you could have a committee with less than the full board. If that's the case, the open meeting law would still apply. that second paragraph, the fact the committee consists in whole or in part of persons who are not members of the public body does not affect its status as a public body subject to the open meeting law. What does that mean? If there's a mix of board members and others, that group could still be subject to the open meeting law if it meets the other criteria that we've talked about. And the definition of advisory committee does not include advisory groups established by the single head of an agency. Now, the superintendent, the district is not an agency, it's a political subdivision, but there's a parallel between the superintendent and an agency head. You may have heard of a recent Attorney General opinion from their open meeting law compliance team dealing with Litchfield Elementary School District, where they had a group that was formed to talk about develop curriculum policies and a district equity statement. There was an open meeting law complaint filed. The Attorney General reviewed that complaint and concluded that particular committee was subject to the open meeting law. The Attorney General's letter to Litchfield Elementary School District has this disclaimer that the letter is not a formal opinion of the Attorney General's office and should not be cited as authority in other matters, meaning it was only to resolve that particular dispute, that particular concern. It wasn't the formal opinion on a broader scale, but we still want to be aware of that, factor that into how we're doing, see how what Liberty does compared with what they were doing to learn the lessons so that, again, our compliance mindset withstands any level of review. The facts, as determined by the Attorney General in that situation, and I've put an asterisk there because Litchfield disputed the findings, and the district and the Attorney General could not even agree on how many people were on the committee, and it broke down from there. But the facts, the Attorney General gets the final say. It's good to be king. And the facts as determined by the Attorney General was that the board authorized the superintendent to establish a committee. So that's really a key factor, because again, if it's a superintendent's committee that's not, driven by the board, not designated, not initiated by the board, then the outcome would likely have been different. The Attorney General found that committee comprised of 11 employees and 1 board member. And they spent a fair amount of time in their analysis talking about the board members' involvement in that on that committee raised the connection between what the committee was doing and the policy function of the board, which cannot be delegated. You are the only policy-making body. And the Attorney General also concluded that the primary purpose of the group, the committee, was to advise the board on curriculum policy. Again, that policy connection is significant in this outcome and significant in the statutory language. So the conclusion of the Attorney General in the Litchfield situation was that the committee's purpose was to provide a specific district-wide policy recommendation for board action. And therefore, they went on to say that the deliberations of that committee should more appropriately have taken place in a public meeting. All right, so where does that leave us? You have a board policy, CE, that deals with committees, and you've authorized the superintendent to establish advisory councils, cabinets, committees when deemed necessary for proper administration of board policies and for the improvement of the total educational program. You've not authorized the superintendent to set up committees for the proper development of board policies, but to administer your board policies, you've done that. All cabinets, councils, and committees created by the superintendent shall be for the purpose of obtaining to a maximum degree the advice and counsel of personnel, clients, and patrons of the district. So that's what you currently have. So some takeaways that I think are pertinent here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as well. But you can ask yourself, is this committee, this group, operational, or is it policy is it to develop policy? If it's operational, then it should be good. You know, how do we more effectively recruit teachers, for example? You know, how do we do things better, faster, cheaper? Operational aspects are really not what the open meeting law is meant to address primarily. But if it's policy development and something that is going to set district-wide, rules, then you may want to think, should this, are we subject to the open meeting law in that instance? But most of what the cabinet, for example, does is operational. They're not developing policy. Again, they may, and that's, I think, a key distinction. Second takeaway is who appoints the people that are on this group. If it's you, then you're much more likely to be concluded to that group, that person, that entity is an arm of the board, as opposed to if it's the administration that is filling out the roster of who's going to be on this group, then the definitions that we reviewed at the beginning are less likely to be met. So who appoints, also kind of a key takeaway, I think, for us to be concerned about. You need to think about the burden and the delays associated with open meeting law. Again, I'm not saying that we should do away with the open meeting law, but because it has its advantages, but an inescapable disadvantage of the open meeting law is added burden and delay. So to say, well, why don't we just make all of our committees, for example, why don't we just make all of our committees subject to the open meeting law? I don't think that's one, it's not legally required. It's my area of expertise. Two, I don't think it's an effective managerial approach either. And so another key takeaway, what's the composition of the group? Is our board members involved? If so, our level of scrutiny should go up as to whether this is a group that should follow the open meeting law or not. If you're not involved, level of scrutiny is going to be less, and it's going to be much more likely that committee need not follow all the open meeting law guidelines. And another takeaway is, okay, what happens with the group's work product? Is it used internally by the administration to do their jobs better, faster, cheaper, so to speak? If so, again, no real open meeting law concerns. If the work product is brought back to you for a policy decision-making purpose, then again, we'll want to take a closer look at that. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you may have.
Brian?
Oh, first of all, I'd like to thank you for coming here and spending your quite valuable time to go over this with us. Just for clarity, you represent, and your firm represent the school district, correct?
Represent Liberty Elementary School
Right,
District, absolutely.
right. And should the board get in trouble sanctioned by the AG, we'd have to find our own counsel and take care of that ourselves, correct?
No, not necessarily. If there was, again, you have insurance through the Arizona School Risk Retention Trust, and the district would tender, say for example, if there was a complaint filed against an individual board member for open meeting law noncompliance, the district would tender that
And
complaint.
they'll pay any fines that are,
They wouldn't pay the fine. They may provide you a defense, but the statute prohibits the district from paying a fine that
right.
an individual board member
Well, I've been on
incurs.
boards before and been hung out before, and I don't care to do that again. Thank you very much. So I kind of understand how this works. You know, I want to kind of focus in a little bit on the committees that are established by the superintendent, and this has kind of been my area of concern. It was very clear in board policy or in the policy that we authorized the superintendent to create those. Not only did I get input from other council and other boards, but it's very clear to me this creates an extension to the public body. We could be held under the open meeting laws because we authorize, and that key word is authorized. Arizona Agency Handbook provides that a special standing committee may consist of members of the public body who've been appointed or authorized to act for the public body. My point here is, it's not, we're in a gray area. I don't think we can sit here and say for certain that if Attorney General didn't want to come down on us for something, they wouldn't. It isn't clear cut to me. That's my concern. I've also, done a little bit of research on this, and talking to I've talked to other board members in other school districts, and they made it very clear to me that any committee that makes any policy or educational material, changes in policy or education materials to the board of governors they always go to the side of the open meeting law because they don't want to have any issues. What's your take on that?
Both the statute, the open meeting law statute, and the Attorney General's letter to Litchfield Elementary School District point that out, that when interpreting the open meeting law, you err on the side of openness.
Right.
So,
Okay.
yeah, that doesn't mean everything is subject to the open meeting law.
Well, I would also argue it goes the other way. The other way would be just because the superintendent appoints a committee doesn't mean it isn't complied to open meeting law. I think we can go both directions.
I will allow that. I'm not going to disagree with that. Now, I will say that when the superintendent appoints the committee, the likelihood of that committee being required to follow the open meeting law is substantially lower than, if the board is involved in it.
Right. Again, my concern is we went through open meeting law training, and there was some things that came up during that raised this red flag for me. I'm fairly new to the board, and when I look at these issues coming in, and we've had some issues with open meeting law. I want to be squeaky clean here. I think we have to be accountable to the public, and I think making things as open as possible to the public is our primary responsibility here, and I'm going to continue to push that. So thank you for your time.
Mr. Rosenfeld, I do have a question. Brian brought up a point. Just because an open meeting law violation is filed with the AG, does that mean that it's an actual open meeting law violation?
No, people file complaints all the time.
They file complaints all the time,
Not found
correct?
to actually be a violation.
Right. So the AG would come down on the district itself, correct? If there was a violation, whether it's some type of retraining, whatever it may be, there would be something that would be issued, and that would be public knowledge also, correct?
The determinations the open meeting law enforcement team makes are public records. So, which is why we know what they told Litchfield and why we're able to try to learn from that. That's a matter of public record. And the most common consequence that the open meeting law enforcement team would propose be taken to resolve the matter is typically training. If you're a frequent flyer in their office, then they follow progressive steps, just like a typical employer would do. If it's an egregious deal, they would skip a few steps, just like you would expect them to. But the most common consequence is training, because that's the objective, is compliance.
And I might be putting you on the spot here in, say, in a recent 4-year period, how many violations has this district had, open meeting law violations?
I don't know the number of that. I know there have been a number of complaints.
Number of complaints, number of violations, because it's my recollection that there's been one that was
The
approximately.
vast majority of the complaints have been determined to be unfounded.
Unfounded,
And the
right.
district was found to be in compliance.
Because it's my understanding that there's been one, and that actually happened when it happened before I had been appointed, approximately 4 to 5 years ago, and I got to be part of a training of a previous board of this district's experience. But again, I understand what you're saying, we want to be squeaky clean, and I might argue that just because there are complaints put in does not mean that the district is guilty. That might argue that here in recent years that the district has been clean. That emotions
Well,
run high.
that isn't where I was going. And, I think we have to be careful here. I think it's not the right way to go. We start playing, legal gymnastics. I think we want to make sure we have maximum transparency and we're doing things right. The optics of having even, a complaint isn't something we want as a board. So my point is I'll take this up a little later, but, I think we need to evaluate what our policy is and make sure that we're doing it correctly so we don't have to have these discussions in the future.
Because I think one thing that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that would happen is if the board appointed committees, there's a pretty big process that actually takes place of how many, who are they, applications, resumes, doing the backgrounds, what expertise do you have? And then when that's all done, then you actually, when they have the meeting, who's going to run the meeting? And then there cannot be any type of candid conversations, if you will, correct? That can typically take place in some of these committees. And maybe Dr. Schuff, you can explain that part of it, that people will get frustrated when it comes to these things because they don't understand that the district is liable if somebody who has never been a part of this for curriculum, if you will. I'm just using that as an example. I don't know, or actually we're going to have some committees, I think, taking place with the extras, curricular activities and things of that nature. So that's why,
If I may
Yeah.
respond to a couple of points, your point on transparency, which is a very, very valid issue to be concerned about. There's a couple ways to achieve transparency. Of course, the open meeting law does that. But another way, when things aren't, much of what the district does is not subject to the open meeting law. It doesn't mean that they're not transparent. There's public records law as well. And that's another check and balance the public has available to it to ensure transparency. Our records are largely available to the public to look at. And so if a group is not subject to the open meeting law, the conclusion should not be that there's a lack of transparency, because there are other ways to ensure transparency. And to the point of compliance, when we have one board now that think about the amount of training that you get on this. And when you have multiple committees that may be subject to the open meeting law, of course, the risk, the likelihood of non-compliance ramps up with all of that. And the amount of training and oversight that you will be imposing on someone, Dr. Schuff, goes up too, because there's Arizona School Board Association that has all these opportunities for you to get trained and stuff. The Las Brisas Academy, whatever committee, isn't going to have access to all of that type of training in all likelihood. And so, yes, transparency. Everybody's in favor of transparency. But to automatically say, let's overextend the open meeting law's reach to a committee that it does not need to reach, you're going to raise the certainty of non-compliance, because you're just going to be having so many more meetings that are going to be held to that standard, and so many more people involved with limited amount of oversight. You're going to put additional burden on your superintendent and the board secretary, who are your experts on open meeting law, to get there.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and as a board member and somebody who is sitting here and has a responsibility to the public, my first priority is to them. And when it comes down to it, we can play, like I said, we can do the legalistic where we need to be. I also look at the fact of what's happening optically in the public right now. And I'm looking at the stuff, especially is it educational materials. We need to be much more open, all the way from start to end, because it's going to come back and bite us. And I see it, and it's happening in other districts. I just want to make sure, because they're going to the public will use this. If we start if we start threading the needle with open meeting laws, they'll come at us. So I'm looking at the whole picture. And, again, my responsibility is to my constituents here. And, they're demanding transparency through the whole process. I just want to make sure we're doing it right.
Absolutely. And I think that, is shared by everyone. And to the extent that there are questions about whether a committee is subject to the open meeting law, happy to work with Dr. Schuff on that, happy to, update the board and come back to you and give you our analysis on that, so that you're fully informed on what we're thinking, why we're thinking it, because I know that the desire is to achieve full compliance, and the district's track record in that area is good, even though there have been is active oversight of the district in that area.
Thank you.
May I add something? With the committees, let's just call them of the superintendent, they could have come from other cabinet members as well. One of the things that we do for transparency is, one, the makeup of the committees. Just about in all cases, there is an open call for anyone who wants to participate. We've never had so many that we really can't allow for them all to participate. So one, it's open in terms of membership. We work hard to make sure there's at least some representation of various stakeholders. So we might do some additional inviting to try to get some people there, that representative, if that doesn't naturally show up on its own. Two, we work to summarize those meetings and publish those on the website. So whether it's budget committee or if it was something else, we'll draft those minutes and submit those back out again so that they are public. And then where it becomes challenging to do open meetings. So in our case, as a public body, something shows up last minute, if it's important and we've got an opportunity, we've got this committee together. If we have a posting requirement and we aren't able to meet that, then we wouldn't be able to have the conversation in the moment. And then if it requires the additional scrutiny of the open meeting, some of these committees that we meet with 1 week after another, we may need to push them to be 2 weeks apart just to be able to allow the additional layers that come with that. And so then that becomes an expanded time period. So some of the things that can help us to move forward are impeded by some of those extra layers. But I think that to me, one of the most important ones is membership. And the second one is being able to communicate a summary of what happened in a meeting. So anybody who wanted to look at that would be able to do so. And, do we post that and actually make it easy for them without them even having to do a public records request? So I too believe in that transparency. And I'm also looking for some operational efficiencies when we have limited staff and limited opportunities to bring people together, because it does take time for people to do this work. So I think if we could find a balance of how we do that versus having if we're erring always on the side of open meeting law, I do think that would be cumbersome and impede our progress. But at the same time, we do the extra work involved for some of the requirements of open meeting law, whether we're required to or not.
I might also argue that some of the committees, advisory committees that superintendent has put together, they can advertise all they want. It doesn't mean that people are going to show up. And then when people don't participate from the public, well then, of course, then that can be perceived that they weren't invited. But I can tell you that everyone's, from the way that I understand it, the whole public's involved, has that opportunity. And what I might also say is just because there might be a perception that the public isn't involved, doesn't necessarily mean that that's not always factual, because I've been involved in some of the different things that have taken place here within this room that was extremely transparent, excuse me, of a roundtable meeting. It was extremely transparent.
Well, we're dealing with two separate issues, public perception and the legal aspect of this. I'm not convinced that we're still not threading the needle on the legal side of it. And I'm not going to be, based on what I've researched and looked into. I think we can cover our bases a little bit if I think we need to take this up in another meeting and really have an in-depth discussion and seeing maybe if there's a way we can balance this out. I don't think we're going to be able to do it here tonight. I think we need to dig into this some more, and my concern stays with the legal aspect of this, and I think that it's just not perfectly clear to me that we couldn't be the subject of an AG investigation.
Mr. President, if I may, I have a couple things. One, I want to make the record, or I want to clarify the record. Statement was made, we haven't had an open meeting violation in about 4 years. I believe we're currently under sanction for some actions that took place in executive session, and we have to report special notes to the AG for review over the next 3 meetings, and that happened just prior. The violation happened just prior to me being seated on the board. However, I am required as a board member to participate in those sanctions. So the last violation was not 4 years ago. It was much more recent. And we do have a letter from the AG that I received saying we were in violation. So that needs to be clear for the record and for the public. Secondly, when we talk about perception, I want to make something very clear. Perception is reality. And the perception of our voters in this district is we're not doing the job right, because if we were, we would have passed the override. So perception is a lot more than just what people think and what you think they think and how you think they've misconstrued it. But it is ultimately real. And if you're doing good and your perception is good, you'll have success. If you're doing good and people think you're not doing good. I'm concerned that we have an override budget committee that's taking place currently. It was posted on our Facebook page. It clearly states that that recommendation is going to be brought back to the board. I think that probably requires us to be a little more transparent with that. When we talk about getting people on committees, the highest honor I could give this district would to say we do an absolute horrible job in recruiting public and key community members to be a part of those. I ask people all the time if they know anything about it. I've asked this district for a year to create a mailing list that the public can get on from our website and see things, where it's forced to them via an email versus having to go check a website and wonder if it's going to be posted at 10 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock in the morning, or when it might be. We've now hired a director of communications, and I would strongly encourage staff to figure out a way to get a true mailing list to any interested party that wants to be a part. That would help with transparency. I'm concerned that our lawyer, and with all due respect, had a different opinion than what the AG rendered in the last ruling. And I remember very clearly Dr. Schuff saying, our lawyer doesn't really agree with this, but it doesn't really matter because the AG has the final say. I personally spoke with the Open Meeting Law Department recently, and they said that the way that things are being done is ridiculously absurd. That was the quote. I asked specifically about board members being able to attend committee meetings. They said being a board member does not take your right away of being a public tax-paying member in a district. If you want to go there, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you be allowed to? So we've been told we can't. They said, no, that's not the case. So I'm concerned, again, we've had School Board Association come do some training. They went to great lengths to basically say, well, change some wording and you can get around some of this stuff. That's not transparency, that's smoke and mirrors. And we have to change that perception. I am more than willing to delay a process to get it right, to be transparent and have there be no surprises for the general public, teachers, staff, community members, and anybody else you want to add to that list. I asked repeatedly in this district about board members being allowed to do a community roundtable. I was told we couldn't do that. Attorney General's office said, why can't you? Elected officials do that all the time, all over the place. Do it. So I think we have some large transparencies, and the AG's office was also very clear to say that their omelet team is basically kept in business by school boards because other government bodies have figured out transparency and open meeting, and school boards seem to want to try to hide around it. So I fully support what Mr. Parks has brought forward. I think we need to do better. There is a burden to do the reports properly, but being threatened with the risk of violating a policy is not grounds for me to believe that we should just not be transparent. That seems counterproductive and foolish. I think when we blatantly advertise on our Facebook page that we're having meetings to talk about budget issues, a budget is essentially a policy. We're developing a number, the way things are being spent, what's happening, that's a policy. And to have that posted on a Facebook page, not be agendized, not let people see it, is not appropriate. So I think we need to take this much more serious. I would again ask staff to have somebody from the Attorney General's office come out. When I spoke with them, they said, who do you want to listen to? The person with the answer key or the person who thinks they got all the answers? Again, no respect to anybody, but that was the statement that was made. I firmly believe we need to take each of these and ask, we're under some sanctions. I think it behooves the Attorney General's office to answer our questions when we have them. I think we could become a model district in showing this. And with, as Mr. Parks said, the current temperature in our legislature, amongst our taxpayers, we have to do a better job at being transparent. And by doing that, we will improve that perception of the taxpayer and will be more successful.
Dr. Schuff, do you have anything that you'd like to discuss? It seems like there was an accusation, and I might dispute that.
I have no comment.
Because one thing that I do dispute is a community roundtable. And what I will say is that district funds are what's not allowed to be used for a community roundtable. And a community roundtable.
For electioneering, sir.
What would
For
be
electioneering.
What would be community roundtable would be that all board members are invited, not just a single board member to have on district grounds, as what has been suggested in the past.
It was never
I
said it
believe
had to
that
be on
I-
district grounds.
I believe that that's what was denied before.
No, it can be anywhere.
And as
It
far
can be
as,
absolutely anywhere, but it can be advertised. That's not, what's prohibited in school is electioneering. You cannot electioneer on school grounds.
you cannot campaign with,
Having a town
Taxpayer.
hall is not having a taxpayer deal. We have an elected official in an office. We have to be able to operate and do our job as an elected official.
when one board member is the only one invited.
Who said one board member would be invited? Is that your assumption?
That's my assumption.
Well, your assumption is wrong, because the town hall could be one board member, two board members. It could be a quorum if you posted it.
Because it's my understanding that
I'll
what
just
has,
jump in and say this may be a topic that you would want to put on an agenda. It doesn't really relate to what we're talking about, in my view. So,
Thank you. We'll do that.
is there any further questions, discussion?
Can I request a few minute recess?
So there's a motion for a recess. How long?
Just a couple minutes.
So there's a motion for a small break. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second for, say, a 5-minute break in the action. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye. We will be back in at 9:01, please. we're on to item 6.2, third-party construction evaluation. Mr. Nuttall.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. At a previous board meeting, it was requested for district administration to provide some information specific to third-party vendor evaluation of construction of our new schools. Prepared for you this evening some information that we have back. As you're likely aware, the district is working with DLR Group, who is assigned Katrina Leach, who is gracing us with her presence again tonight. Welcome, Katrina. And David is with us as well, David Schmidt from DLR, to answer any additional more technical questions in specific disciplines. I did want to provide a brief overview of some checks and balances for you before we get to the information that you requested, if that's okay. I'll be as brief as I possibly can here. So just wanted to bring forward the group of team members that have been involved in this whole process. So you have all these different disciplines with DLR and Chase, as we know, but City of Buckeye for inspections, Hess Roundtree for engineering, Logan Simpson, they do our landscape design. Design Tech is for food services, kitchen equipment, and Climate Tech is for our HVAC controls. And of course, last but not least, our district has been involved as well. So just wanted to point out that there are several different disciplines in this whole checks and balances process. And what you see here is each of the disciplines that are outlined. For each of the two new builds, as well as the associated dates for our punch walks. So as an example, Katrina and Eric, both with DLR, were the leaders of the architectural interiors, and we conducted a series of punch walks as the architectural interiors discipline carried along throughout both of the projects. Roof is the same way. Architectural building exterior, same thing. Mechanical and plumbing, which includes HVAC, is the first name you'll notice different. He's the primary mechanical engineer for DLR, and those are those associated dates for our punch walks. The electrical and food service, as I mentioned before, you'll see those punch walks and those additional individual disciplines. And finally here we have civil, which is Hess Roundtree for site utilities, grading and drainage on two different occasions as the buildings were phased out, and for landscaping as well for David Case and associated with Logan Simpson. In addition to all of our inside, if you will, walkthroughs and punch lists and levels of accountability, Chase coordinates all of the city inspections through the City of Buckeye, in our particular case with both Blue Horizons and Liberty. And we use a system that are accessible online for efficiencies. As an example, just wanted to kind of walk you through very quickly each one of these numerical items here presented is the step-by-step process for inspections. And so I don't want to read the PowerPoint that all of us can read, but I just wanted to kind of show you all and show the public that each single step of the way has its own individual inspection as you go through, as this example of HVAC. So for HVAC, specifically the subcontractors, Tri-Mega Mechanical was the group that did the HVAC units and systems for Liberty Elementary, and Corporate Air Mechanical Systems did Blue Horizons. Upon the completion, you'll note item number 5 here in the city inspection, followed by 6 and 7. This is part of this systems commissioning and testing. Liberty Elementary, we had a third-party group come in and do the balance, testing and balance for Liberty Elementary, Associated Air Balance Council, and then Blue Horizons performed by TAB, Technology Incorporated, which is documented there. I've included the test and balance reports for each particular system in your board packets. So as I mentioned before, the punch list, I just wanted to involve the folks that have been involved in each of the steps of the way for the punch list. So myself and Kevin, as you all know, is our maintenance supervisor. Katrina and Eric, who were noted several times from DLR, and then Chase representatives, including Patrick and Ben. So we've walked with the superintendents of each site multiple times, all of those dates that were aforementioned. So specific to third-party HVAC inspections, we reached out to 2 third parties, the first being BESP. Mr. Samir Pandey is the principal engineer of that group for building energy solutions provider. We also reached out to Central Service Group, Cameron Kurtzen. Sorry, Cameron, if I mispronounced your name. We did receive a quote back for the HVAC systems, specific to just the HVAC systems from BESP. And those items, or those dollar amounts, are noted there for $7,500 for Liberty L and $9,500 for Blue Horizons. Despite multiple opportunities, I personally called Cameron myself, did not hear back, and sent 3 or 4 emails for requesting the information. Not sure, could be the holidays, but we're still waiting to get some information back there. So we also did third-party inspections for the full scope of work, reached out to 3 groups. You'll notice that Abacus, they just passed. They had limited availability to be able to respond, limited resources. Trimac Consulting, no read receipt and no response. We did get some information back from H2 Group. Obviously, as it notes there, there's 1 GPA. And they guesstimate between $25,000 and $40,000 cost for the full scope for each campus, taking about up to 3 weeks to each campus, for each campus. Now, there's a range there because there could be some specialized testing in addition. Don't know exactly what that would look like. We'd have to dig in a little bit further to that with the H2 group. We also reached out to the trust, and they will provide a review and inspection of all testing reports at no cost to us as a district. We've submitted all of the information that they've requested, examples of like percent completion, who all the parties were, square footage, systems, drawings. We've submitted all that to the trust and are awaiting information back to hear back from them as to when they can schedule their review from the trust for us. So I have Katrina here to answer any questions. I think that the topic of our conversation is just to seek direction from the board and to determine our next steps in terms of the direction you all want to go moving forward with the inspections.
Paul?
I don't have any questions this time. So if I'm looking at the numbers, the HVAC evaluation itself is about 17,000 for both buildings. And then there's a range from 25,000 to 40,000 for everything.
Correct.
Okay.
Brian? Michael?
Mr. President, I don't really have any questions. I think if the trust will do a third-party evaluation, we should certainly do it. I think having another third-party group, I'm a little confused. Is the other one that was 25 to 40,000, does that include HVAC as well? Or is that?
That includes all systems.
So even if we go on the high side, I'm a little concerned about that range. They almost double their range, but even if we spend 40,000 for 2 schools to have a third-party blessing, I think that would make me feel a little more comfortable. We did the walk at Liberty and certainly saw some issues. The gym floors and the multipurpose or the PE room are not impressive at all. I'm sure those were quite expensive. I don't know the exact cost, but they should be holding up longer than 4 months of school, and they're already peeling back and look pretty rough. So I definitely think we should consider this, and it never hurts to have a neutral third party involved. I don't know how good of a job the trust does. I don't know the qualifications of these folks, but being stewards of taxpayers' money, sometimes we have to spend a little bit in order to ensure that we are doing the right thing. I'm very concerned about the HVAC system. I heard nothing but concerns, and I don't think we're going to be able to really test that until next year. And I am pretty disappointed in the way that that turned out. I heard from everybody that it wasn't good at either campus, but especially at Liberty. So that would be my thoughts on this topic.
I'd like to give everyone a chance to look at the report that was compiled, the existing report that you all have, the list that I hope that board members, when they did their walk, that they sent over. I mean, for me, I'd rather like to see the list be taken care of and then us do another walk. And if things aren't rectified at that point, then be calling in someone who's going to do an absolute deep dive. I mean, that's just my thought on it. I think we got one more school to look at coming up here pretty quick. Because for me, if we're able to eliminate that list and get all these different things taken care of, then we be able to look at justifying possibly being able to spend some additional money if we thought we needed to, if we still had that level of concern.
So I can come back with the DLR group and Chase to review. We've already reviewed the lists and create some action items, present some other information to you at a later board meeting to give you some updates on our progress, see what other things that they might advise to do in addition to what's been suggested here tonight. We would like to move forward with the trust regardless, because it's a liability service that, to several points made tonight, it's not going to hurt us. It helps us in our relationship with the trust. So we would like to do that regardless, and that could provide us with some additional information as well.
Is there anything that would be eliminated because of time? If we worked on the punch list that we created as far as the walkthrough, and then have the trust, is there anything that would be eliminated as far as that evaluation just because of time?
I suppose that it could be.
I would also say that, a number of the items that were, brought up were already, on the radar, just things that were still needed to be completed. So, I don't know how many of them are new versus already known. So that's a balance there, to be fair for Chase and the work that they're doing. So I'm hearing a variety on the board, all the way from, spend the $40,000 to take a step back, see what is completed on this list, see if there's anything outstanding. Just looking for a little more consensus from the board on some direction for administration.
For me, I like what Mark had to say. I like looking at it that way. We've identified a number of things, some that have already been identified, but things that hadn't as well. And so we work on getting that and then pursue the trust. And if we're still concerned at that point, I think, I would look real favorably towards that full inspection.
Also to Mr. Todd's point, and I've heard Mr. Aguirre say also, some of the concerns with HVAC. We need the full hot, humid weather to fully know that, but that is also within our time period for warranty. So, to the point is we do want that corrected if it needs to be corrected prior to, people being inconvenienced and discomfort. So we're aware of that as well. Mr. Parks?
I think I'd lean towards looking through that punch list first and making sure, see where we're at, and then make the investment where we need to.
I just like to go on record and say that there should be no punch list.
Okay. To be fair.
That's the way I operate, so do it right the first time and you won't have a punch list.
Understood. All right, thank you. That's helpful.
I would support that.
Is there any other discussion on item 6.2?
Mr. President, I would fully support your comments on the punch list. A little disappointing.
Item 6.3, discussion of first reading of policy IJJ. Dr. Schuff.
President Aguirre, members of the governing board, our board approved a change with primary and supplemental materials, and then that change was overwritten with the new policy advisory coming out from ASBA, which didn't reflect kind of the customization of our own policy. The intent of statute around this is to that the textbooks and the primary textbooks that are used have the approval of the governing board, go through a 60-day review process with the community, and just transparently provide all of those materials to the public. And this distinction is with supplementals, and those are things that where there may be some gaps in our textbooks, are the primary materials that we use. For no textbook really hits all the standards. The state of Texas might come pretty close because they write the textbooks for the standards in Texas or sometimes California, but not necessarily Arizona and the Arizona standards. So we will often find some discrete standards that just are not met within the materials. And so that we will look for some additional supplemental materials. Sometimes it's as small as a story, or it might be a collection of informative articles, or it could be some science activities that are fit for a particular standard that is not addressed in our primary textbook materials. There are multiple things, software specifics, just for certain interventions. So it's wide and varied. Teachers have the discretion to bring in something in addition. They're given the curriculum, they're given our primary resources, they're expected to use those. But when there's some gaps for a particular student, looking for something that's high interest, relevant, for example, they might bring in something on baseball because they know a particular child or a small group of boys would have a higher interest, and they'll bring that in for a particular activity for those standards. Those are some examples of when there would be some supplemental uses that wouldn't necessarily go through an entire 60-day review process in teachers' individual lesson planning. So that's the kind of the reason for bringing it back, is really just to correct the two policies, the version that was approved previously and the version that was most recently approved, and this combines those two versions. Any questions, any comments?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. I was wondering why supplemental materials were pulled out as a separate section. And that's because perhaps it's something that would happen, you would decide on that supplemental material between the selection cycles of the textbooks?
So, for example, we have our primary reading textbook that is adopted. It's got a lot of materials and resources that go with it. It's very expensive, and yet it has some gaps in maybe some of the writing standards that are in there. So we may bring in some additional supplemental resources to support us with teaching some writing skills to children, but it's not covered in our primary textbook. And it's got a very limited scope. Or another example would be to maybe not use for all children, but for children of a specific need with a particular skill set that's needed.
Okay. Yeah, it just was wondering why it would see a separate cycle than the textbooks would. As far as our revision cycle, what is it? Do we have a set revision cycle? Do we?
We do. we've got approximately a 10-year cycle. I would tell you that it's actually an expanded cycle from that, just because of the availability of capital dollars to be able to fund those things. So from a supplemental standpoint, the district has been creative about finding open source materials that don't have copyright that we can still use to supplement where needed to fill some of those gaps. However, if there is no primary textbook adopted, then the supplementals must go through the whole process as if it was the primary. So let's say in social studies, we don't have an adopted textbook. So in the absence of the adopted textbook, then if we're using a supplemental, then it kind of, in actuality, becomes the primary text, even though it may only address a few of the standards. So that would essentially then elevate it to the primary textbook.
Right. Because there's no primary
Correct.
source
Correct.
being used. What happens to the stuff that we're not using anymore?
So the policy, it would be that we bring that back to the governing board. And so, following this time, Mrs. Camp will be bringing back our lists of primary and supplemental materials. So that is public to everyone, so to see what those things are. And then for the primary textbooks, we actually have a board vote to approve them to be taken off of the list.
But physically, what happens to them? We aren't walking out to a dumpster and throwing them in, are we?
No, it just like all materials, they then get collected back. So if the committee and the recommendation is maybe it's shifted from a primary and there's maybe a couple of sections in that book that are still really relevant, it could be relegated to a supplemental. But typically what would happen is we would pull all of them back, send them to the warehouse, bundle them up for auction, and then dispose them in that way. There are used textbook series will do it.
I want to make sure that we stay on topic here.
Sure.
We're just discussing this first
policy.
reading.
Oh.
So Brian, did you have any questions about the
Yeah,
first
this is kind of concerning to me. I'm just really not okay with kind of carte blanche. Teachers can bring in. I understand where it's coming from. Do we have an active list of materials that aren't allowed in the classroom? How does that work?
It's more defined by policy of what's not appropriate in the classroom, and so it wouldn't be a list of a particular publisher with a copyright date or a title of something.
Well, I understand that, but there are certain things that obviously parents don't want in the classroom. I think we're opening the door with no board oversight, and a teacher can bring something in that's inappropriate. I'm not okay with that. I kind of come from the side, look, if we have an up-to-date policy saying, look, these materials are not acceptable in the classroom, fine. I don't want to be a micromanager there, but you're kind of put in a position of the board kind of opening the door here, and I don't want to do that. So
That's the part where the board has approved the curriculum. And so a very clear and specific directive with any materials is that it is aligned to the curriculum. So it wouldn't be teaching content or skills that are not approved by the governing board. And that is policy, and that would be employee discipline by going against that. And then there are listed things that are inappropriate in classrooms that are in policy.
how up to date is that?
Approved recently within the last few months.
Okay.
Well, it says right here in this policy, use of textbooks or supplementary instructional resources inconsistent with this policy may be cause for discipline up to and including termination. A list, and just above that, a list of all board-approved primary instructional resources and district-approved approved supplemental instructional resources shall be maintained for access by educators in the district and the parents on the district website. I think everything that you're bringing up is actually covered within this new language. to just exactly what your concerns are, of that the board's the one who's approving everything, and then if anything else is brought in other than that, that it says right here, it's cause for discipline up to and including termination.
Then I don't understand the distinction difference.
Primary textbooks are the primary go-to resource that we use to teach a given content or grade level, and the content and skills that are in the that help to teach the curriculum that has been approved by the governing board. Supplementals would fill in a gap. You know, let's say you've got 10 standards and there's one standard that's got maybe one article in the whole book that teaches to that standard, and you need some more material in order to appropriately teach it, provide opportunity to practice, independently assess whether kids have learned it or not, and you need some additional articles, let's say.
Right, and that's at the teacher's discretion.
So in actuality, if we, as we develop curriculum, we also ascribe what resources should be used. And so that's where the committee would say, hey, there's a gap here, and we recommend we review all of these supplemental resources. So we actually prefer that is committee driven. So we really are checking and balancing that alignment. And that would be listed then, the supplementals would be listed in the curriculum saying, in this case, use page 22 of this, workbook, if you will, of something to support that. It would be, if we get that good at that with developing our curriculum and having it be that specific, it should become much, much more rare where a teacher would be finding some individual thing off of Teachers Pay Teachers or some creative thing they found off the internet. We shouldn't be seeing that as a rule. And then if that was happening, that saying the principals, our practice and policies, its principals need to be aware of that and approving those things.
Okay.
That's the benefit of us having a strong curriculum.
It also included online curriculum as well.
So textbooks has had a much broader definition today because so many things are more electronic. So it just has a broader definition and inclusive of that.
Thank you.
Good questions. And I think, our parents appreciate those questions also. Is there anything that any of the board members would like to see adjusted in some way for a second reading?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, sorry, Mr. President, for some reason I have chairman always stuck in my head. I understand what IJJ is doing, and one thing I strongly believe is that we cannot handcuff teachers to where they've got to get every single thing that they do approved. We've got to give them some ability, and we have to hope that they don't stretch that empowerment too far and introduce something. This could be a slippery slope for introducing things into the school that parents don't want to see. I would be okay with trying this, but I would like to see that this policy, we add to this policy that it's reviewed quarterly for a while, make sure that we're still doing things properly. And I would like to, with the current environment we're in, when we say up to and including termination, it's very vague. I think we need to spell out exactly what a first violation would be, what a second violation would be for that. Because otherwise it's vague. And if this goes awry, the public is coming to the board to complain, and we have no input currently as to what would happen to a staff member that violated this policy, other than say up to and including, but it could mean nothing happens. I think that would demonstrate a little more involvement of the board It would also allow the public to feel a little bit more comfortable that we are not setting up a slippery slope of things being introduced. I do agree, as we continue to develop curriculum, which is something this district previously didn't have, that there's probably less likelihood of things coming in, but we're not quite there yet. And I do appreciate your example, Dr. Schuff, of maybe bringing in a book about baseball. I thought Mr. Nuttall and I would both think that's a great topic. But to bring forth a topic that's of interest to a child is critical. I can tell you that I remember back to my elementary days. I'm old, but I still do remember that. And being forced to read some of the stuff I was forced to read was probably the worst punishment and really turned me off from school more. So when I got teachers who said, hey, read this, do a book report on this instead. Oh, hey, well, now we're talking. And, you want to read more and do more. So I like the idea. There should be nobody on our campus that knows a student better than their teacher. And so they're going to understand, hey, what might be the spark to accelerate the student again, which is only going to make those numbers that we're already working hard on get better if they do that. So I'm okay with this, but I do think it needs to be reviewed a little more frequently, mainly to give the public a sense of comfort that the board is watching closely on this policy, and we're cutting off any slippery slopes before they happen. But at the same token, we've got to give it a try to see if they're even, it's all hypothetical that there could be a slippery slope. Maybe there's not, and I would like to trust that our staff will follow it well.
There are a couple opportunities. One is the curriculum, where it cites what resources are used. So that's one opportunity the board has on an annual basis. And then when we bring back those lists publicly, at least on an annual basis, that's built in.
Right. I understand we got annual, but I think in the time being, given the current political environment that we're in, we need to just keep this at the forefront. And this is really simple to bring back quarterly, or I would even go, every 6 months, maybe twice during the active school year and once during the summer. That just keeps it on the forefront, and it keeps us out of any potential trouble. And if things are going well, this is going to be really smooth. It could be on a consent agenda to continue to approve it and move forward. So it'll take no time out of the board to make sure, but it does send a clear message to our staff and to our public that we are keeping a close tab on this. And Mr. Parks, maybe that addresses some of your concerns as well.
Yeah. Is there going to be a place to post what the supplementary books are for the public?
We're going to bring the list back once this is approved. We'll bring back the list of primary and second supplementals. We'll bring that back for board, administrative topic, and then place that on the.
So I feel like we're getting way off track here. So if there's concerns about the way this is written, my recommendation is that those individual board members, that you go ahead and either add to or delete from this particular policy and submit that to administration to bring back for an additional first reading.
Fine by me.
Okay, so if there's additions or deletions, it's up to the individual board members to redline and add to. That way that can be brought back for a first reading.
Otherwise, this will be the first reading here.
Otherwise, this will be the first reading if there's no additions or deletions. Item 6.4, discussion and consideration to approve warehouse supervisor position and job description, revised exempt support salary schedule, and revised organizational chart. Dr. Schuff.
President Aguirre, members of the governing board, we have additional enrollment growth this school year. And with additional enrollment growth, that also comes additional funding because we're in current year funding. The district has budgeted for some of that growth in our regular budget already, and because we have more growth than what was expected, we're anticipating, and we'll see more funding for this school year. And what happens when we have growth is that we have to provide support first and foremost in our classrooms. So we have approved posting and the ability to hire additional teachers this school year to handle the additional growth. We have both, that would be in the general education, in special education, and also paraprofessional support, primarily in the special education positions. So those are already in action moving forward because we have to respond in real time with to accommodate that growth. When we look at our overall budget, in typical when we do our budget planning and process, we look at our overall budget within programs. So it's kind of like the classification or categories of the budget, if you will, is what the programs are. One of the programs is instruction. Instruction is where we hire our teachers to directly impact kids. We historically have put somewhere between 57 and 59% of our budget out of the pie of the total dollars available towards instruction. So now when we look at these additional teachers that we've hired for this school year, we've got positions posted for those. We actually are looking at maybe like 68% of the increase of budget. The dollars would go to that category, that program. We also have to be responsible to grow the rest of the district to accommodate this extra growth and the extra burden on staff and the ability to do the jobs effectively and with efficiency for operations and effectiveness. So in the case of the category of administration with central services, certain percentage of the overall budget, and so therefore a certain percentage of the increase of dollars we'd be receiving for this for this school year could responsibly go to something that would support the area of either technology, human resources, business services. And in this case, the district is recommending a warehouse supervisor. Currently, we have a courier/warehouse person responsible for warehouse duties. On an average week, that person is only able to spend about 3 to 5 hours in the warehouse because of the courier responsibilities. So really, we've got an unmanned warehouse that is responsible for all the receiving of the district. Our transportation supervisor shifts over from her responsibilities for transportation, managing that, and will come over to support with the receiving of things in the warehouse. Our business services, they spend some time on the receiving side in the warehouse too. Unfortunately, so many things just aren't getting done appropriately. So, if they had more hours to give, they really would be giving it to this because it's needed. And then our curriculum coordinator also spends, about 12 to 15 hours a week just managing the curricular materials that need to be transferred back and forth to schools when a new staff member gets hired, pulling those materials in. And then there's the inventorying of all of those things as well as technology inventory. So we've got multiple departments that are affected by not having a dedicated warehouse supervisor. And the district is just at a point, it's grown to the point that it can't be hodgepodged together any longer. There are dollars available with growth dollars. And so with that, we're recommending the position for this school year.
Questions?
Did I understand that correctly, that we currently don't have a person in this position, so that need is being covered by people from other places within the district? And some of those replacements are per hour expensive?
Much higher priced than what this warehouse supervisor would be, yes. And in addition to that, some of the jobs or tasks just aren't getting done at all, and that is a lacking responsibility of the district that needs to be corrected.
And with those people doing those warehouse responsibilities, they're not doing what we're asking them to do on the other.
Correct.
Brian? Michael?
I have no questions. I'm ready to make a motion. I'd make the motion that we hire the position of warehouse supervisor, approve the job description, and support salary schedule. I think it's important that the public know that we are growing and that warehouse does hold many important documents. Without having some sort of organization there, we are literally wasting money and setting the district up for
Okay,
some
so we
stuff,
have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
So a motion and a second to approve item 6.4. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously. Item 6.5, discussion and consideration to approve Title III Community Outreach Liaison job description.
Mr. President, members of the board, we've brought before you this evening the Title III Community Outreach Liaison job description for your approval. The liaison performs functions like some training for EL students and families that are explicitly listed in the job description itself. They will report directly to the EL coordinator. And so that is a grant-funded position. The funding for that stipended position will be available as long as the grant is available.
Questions?
Just a question. This position sounds to me like it might dovetail well into what we saw earlier about student performance as far as poverty. So can we anticipate that this position may actually help in that?
I think the idea of this position is to put a person in place that can meet whatever needs in this particular population arise. That certainly could be included and likely would be, yes.
Brian?
No questions.
Michael?
No questions.
Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve item 6.3 or 6.5.
A second.
Well, let's make a motion for.
Oh.
I move that we approve the Title III Community Outreach Liaison job description.
So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll try again. Second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve item 6.5. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye, show that it approved unanimously. Item 6.6, discussion consideration to approve process for selection of 3 board candidate names to county superintendent. Dr. Schaaf.
President Aguirre, members of the board, with the resignation of Jamie Miller, we have a board vacancy, and the statutory requirement or responsibility of the governing board is to submit up to 3 names to the county school superintendent. The process by which you do that is relatively left up to you as a group of how you would like to do so. Just as a reminder, the last go-round and very recent, we had an application process and we had a public forum. Our governing board didn't necessarily narrow it to 3, but just some of the recommendations that came forward from the governing board. And Superintendent Watson took those names and then made a selection. So it would be up to you as a board is how you would like the selection process and timeline to go before we turn over the suggested names to the county superintendent.
Yeah, so my feeling is that it should be opened up to the public for application, and that all those applications get sent to Steve and he can do what he needs to do at this point.
It would be possible just to go with the candidates we have from the last experience, is that correct? And ask Superintendent Watson to choose from that?
You can, but I
Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea.
I would venture to say that they would ask for more applications.
I did ask the question about whether we considered a separate process or, the kind of the same process and choose a second candidate from those. The response was that it would be, this is a new vacancy and it's treated as an independent vacancy.
I think we should do it just like we did the past. We have a forum. The only thing I'd like to see change is I'd like to see the public be able to provide some input that attend the forum. But I think that's worked well. We should continue with that process of having the application process. I think we need to speed it up, and we need to send a clear message to Mr. Watson that he needs to expedite his process. It took incredibly too long last time, but to have the forum and allow questions to be answered is far better.
I'm going to put my 2 cents in on this because I just went through it. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and it was for a reason. This is a hard job. This is something you have to take serious. I don't think unless you go through the process, you understand how important it is. I think the process is required. I think what I went through, you have to do, because I think you have to understand what you're doing and what you're getting into. We also need to understand the individuals that are applying for this, and it is a job.
The only reason why I said the process that I said is I've been involved in, I don't even know how many of these at this point. And I can say that the selections just don't matter.
Mattered to me.
It does, right? To the person who got paid. Right? What I'm saying is
I-
the recommendation, not only from the public, recommendation from the board, recommendation from superintendent. It's truly up to Mr. Watson.
I understand and I hear what you're saying, but I still think the board needs to be part of the process.
Okay. Paul?
Now, I understand, and I also went through the process, less successfully than you did, but I'm just so tired of us not having a 5-member board. But I could support doing the whole process again. But I know what you're saying, Mark, and I don't disagree with you.
Okay.
Would you like to provide some direction on the timing? I heard one comment about a shortened application process or timeline. How long would you like, let's say we're able to get that published tomorrow. How many days out should that go out publicly on our website and out to all of our parents?
Close of business on Friday at the very latest.
So tomorrow's Tuesday. Give the public 3 days to respond.
3 days. Listen, if they want to be a board member, they should be following this and they should be knocking on the door in about 30 seconds saying they want to be a part of this. So, to be honest, I'm a little bit frustrated that we have a lot of people show up interested to be a board member who have never attended a meeting and don't even know what the job is. I've never seen people apply for a job that they don't understand until it comes to school boards. So I think by Friday, close the business, and then we move quickly to do a forum and have this wrapped up pretty quickly.
I can't get behind 3 days, I'm sorry.
That seems a little short to me.
How about the following Friday?
I would say a week.
What was the time frame? If we're gonna go through the whole, what I'm hearing is we need to, what I heard is that we need to go through the process like we did before. So if we went through the process like we did before, then we need to be consistent. And the time frame for those applications, if this is the process, then it's gonna take a while. So what was the time frame before? Was it 15 days?
It was about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
If you're trying to fit in a forum before the break, I mean, we certainly could have it close the day before, and they have the forum the next day, and we can notify people ahead of time what the date and time is, and they know that as soon as they've applied, they're pretty much locking themselves into that forum date. I suppose it'd be just, the board has a governing board meeting on the 13th. I'm looking to see if you wanted a separate meeting, the 14th could be available.
It's a little, I'm going to jump ahead here. I got a problem with the 13th and the 14th. I don't know if it's possible we can move this to the 15th and do both.
I actually have the same exact, you surprised me there, but I've got the same issue. I've got an unexpected work obligation that I have to do on those days.
I have a published advisory meeting on the 15th. Could look at doing it Thursday, the 16th.
Works for me.
So if they were due back the 15th, which is a Wednesday, that's giving full 2 weeks. And then the forum, and then the next agenda item, you all can talk about your board meeting date complex. Is that sufficient?
Works for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we need to have, I'd entertain a motion stating what we just talked about as far as the process that we're going to be using.
I'll give it an attempt, Mr. President. I would make a motion that we follow the previous procedure for identifying candidates, with the application process closing on the close of business on the 15th of December, followed immediately by a candidate forum on December 16th. And then we'll send that information to Mr. Watson's office for approval.
May I ask that for it just be adjusted to be earlier than close of business day, just because of having to post all this information 24 hours
I
at a
would
time?
certainly be fine. What would be a good time for you?
I prefer it by noon.
Okay. I would amend my motion to say
14th.
applications need to be in by the 5th. Let's see, we want on the 15th, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, on the 15th by 12 noon, followed by a candidate forum on December 16th at a time determined that evening by staff.
I'll second.
So I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye. Show that it approved unanimously. Are there any governing board topics? Requests?
I've got a couple. I need to request an ASBA board training on board communication protocols. Be really helpful.
Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask if we can just get a very simple, updated class size report that's updated now that we're through the first trimester. I think we have some classes that are a little high, and as we close out the year, I'd be okay waiting until the break, but I'd just like that in a board report. And the other thing I would just like to clarify, I think there's some concern about open campuses and visitors. I'd like for the board to bring that back up and either clarify it or look to establish policy that reopens the campus.
I also had one other agenda item that I'd like to bring up for our next meeting.
Okay.
I don't think we really finished that. I'd like to have a further discussion and maybe come up with a policy change for open meeting laws with committee.
So I don't know that all of these are going to make it on the next board meeting. I'll get with Dr. Schaff and see what she can do, because as far as administration time. Because there's only one board meeting in December, right, Dr. Schaff? And then we start over again in January at that point with 2 a month, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Did we finalize what date that our next board meeting's on?
We haven't got to that part yet.
Okay. I have a tendency to jump ahead, so.
So if I could, this is something that I've been wondering and have been waiting to get to the end of the year on, if I could have a consensus of the board of one thing that I'd like to task administration with, to come up with a tally, possibly by a February board meeting of open meeting, the open meeting law, public records requests, those things that have been asked of the district, and exactly what the outcome of those things were, and how much time and money that the district has spent to see what those comparisons were. So is there,
Let's see what the request of cost is, yeah,
I'd be real curious to know what that is.
good to know.
So clear, what are you recommending then? We wait on the discussion for the open meeting?
No, sir.
Oh, okay.
No, sir. That was your
Okay.
your
I'm
topic,
just-
yep.
Okay, okay.
And I understand where
Just
you're
clarity.
coming from. Nope.
Okay.
And mine is a completely separate topic of.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Is that something, Dr. Schaff, that can maybe take place at either the beginning February meeting, the second February meeting? Does that give enough time to be able to get something together?
Yes, and to speak to the board agenda schedule, you can see the link that's provided that provides the topics that are coming up. So there's still some things where you've got prior board member requests items and then some annual things. So you can see that on that schedule that I publish each week. So we'll start working those in.
Thank you.
Okay. Item 8.1. Next board meeting is December 13th. And then after that is the 10th and the 31st of January.
Mr. Chairman, I will not be able to attend the meeting on the 13th.
Yeah, I have a conflict too.
Did I hear a recommendation to do the forum and the meeting on the same night?
That would work for me.
It will be a full agenda since it's one board member, one meeting.
We're going to do that. I'm okay with that, but that meeting needs to be on a Friday. Some of us get up really, really early.
Fair enough.
Okay. So you're gonna move everything to Friday?
That's what I would need to have done.
That would be fine. Friday the 17th, correct?
If that's okay with administration.
Tough on staff if people are catching flights and everything to get out of town. That's the last day before the break. We could do so. We could also, what's the flexibility of this board to start earlier on the 17th?
We could certainly start earlier.
I'm open.
I could probably be back by about 4. I'm coming back that day.
That's another option with the forum to start it earlier as well.
The forum was passed in a motion on a specific date.
Yes, we're talking about a board meeting. Yep. The forum was passed at the administration's discretion about what time. So, the public forum could also be earlier. So just giving you some options there. Mr. Todd, did you say at 4 o'clock? You could start at Friday at 4 o'clock?
Yes.
Thursday.
On Thursday?
We'd start at 4 at Thursday. Works for me.
Thursday I'm in town. Yeah, Friday I have to be out in the morning or late Thursday night, but whichever.
I could look what can be lightened up on the Friday, the December agenda to see with the board's discussion on even some of the requested items, pushing those into January to accommodate what really needs to get done in December. Does that seem reasonable?
So are we talking about the 17th?
Are we back to Thursday?
Well, what if we,
We've talked about both, so it's a good question.
this is real tight, but what if we made it the 4th? That's a week earlier. I'm sorry, not the 4th, the 6th. I don't have.
So there's
suggestion
already
for
been a
the
motion
forum.
made and passed
For the forum.
for the forum
Right.
for the 16th.
Are you, Mark, were you saying you could do Thursday if it was earlier?
Yeah.
Why don't we just do that? Let's just get it done Thursday. We can start early. 3 of us can, I know. Speaking for Paul.
My life apparently is not as booked as you guys. I've got no conflicts at all.
So is everyone okay to start at 4:30?
On the 16th?
Yeah.
Yes.
Start the public forum. And then
A condensed meeting.
go right into the board meeting after that. Administration okay with that?
I think staff would appreciate it being on the 16th versus the 17th for sure.
Is there any conflicts for the January meetings?
So the only thing I would ask for the January meetings is if we are scheduling, the board requested some public forums on budget. And if we were to do that, we have a board meeting on the 10th. So somewhere between the 10th and the 24th. So I was thinking the week of after the 10th and then the week of the 17th, Monday's a holiday, to do some school meetings. It's up to you. I don't know that we need to do one at all 7 schools. We could do some combined geographic areas, like Estrella West Tar could be together. Blue Horizons Liberty could be together. Some of those are some common families. So we could do it at 4 or 5 of the schools, or, you know, however many you would choose to, but I also need to select the dates for that. So I could put something out later, and those could be added later. We've got a little time. I just wanted to alert you to those times that would be essentially board calendaring.
And that's what was motioned and passed at the last board meeting, of going to the individual sites to explain and hear from our community members of what the implications of not passing the override are going to be for the following school year.
Right, I don't,
That discussion,
it's
right?
that's the discussion. I don't know
Okay.
that it was voted on. I think it was like a future
Yeah.
thing, but
Okay.
yes. So I'll look for 4 or 5 dates and fit them in during those times and see if that meets with your approval.
Okay. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor? Paul?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
I am also an aye. Show that we adjourned at 10:07.